Dear colleagues, if you agree, we can delay for 5, no more, I hope, 10 minutes, because our colleagues are in the committee meetings. Do we agree on that? Okay, thank you. I don't want any British to complain later. Not from this side, usually. In the meantime, just for you to know, there was a technical problem. I hope we will fix it in a minute. So, colleagues, the sitting is open. I remind members that they should insert their badge before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, please press the microphone button once only. I also remind the Assembly that members who have not submitted an annual declaration of interest are required to start any intervention with an oral declaration of interest under paragraph 20 of the Code of Conduct for members of the Parliamentary Assembly. The next item of business this afternoon is a debate under urgent procedure on women's rights in Europe, progress and challenges, document 16211, presented by Mrs. Petra Bayer, rapporteur, on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. The debate is expected to end around 4:15, maybe a bit later because of this delay we had. And I call now Petra Bayer, rapporteur. Dear Petra, you know, of course, that you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes to respond.
Thank you very much, Theodoros. Your body, my choice. Your body, my choice is a quote from a male US nationalist, a Holocaust denier, and I think that his name isn't worth to be mentioned. But his quote went viral on X last winter, and I think that attacks against the rights of women couldn't be summarized more concise as in this quote. Your body, my choice expresses male supremacy and female submission. I associate it with slavery because it's also about degrading women's bodies to possessions, and it deprives women from self-determination. The ideology behind this is clear. Women must not decide about their lives, about their partners, about their professions, about their reproductivity, or about their bodies. This misogynist ideology is in sharp contrast to all what was politically gained over the centuries. Women's rights to inherit, to possess land, to choose the profession they would like to choose, to participate in all spheres of public life and society, and to live a self-determined life is under risk. Because this ideology is a great threat to everything that was gained, and it is also lethal for thousands of women. And let me take some examples. For instance, we know that more than 50,000 women every year become victims of femicides. We know that about 700 women every day die because they have not appropriate assistance when they give birth to their children, because there is no midwife available, for instance. And we know that women who are trafficked, who are sold, who are exploited, are under dramatic danger. You could get the impression that there is a war going on against women, a war that is a global war and that is a silent war. And the withholding of women's rights has indeed many faces. Women are urged back into so-called traditional gender roles, supported also by algorithms and by artificial intelligence. The equality in political and economical bodies is still a dream for many. Vulnerable groups are at a higher risk of cumulative forms of discrimination. Access to sexual and reproductive health and rights is cut, restricted, and underfunded globally. And this list is by far not exhausted. We are told quite often with a patronizing smile that women never had it better. We vote, we lead, we build, we create, and indeed we survive. But the truth is, every right we hold today was not handed to us. It was fought for. It was hardly fought for. And every inch gained is under threat. And let me be clear, this debate is first and foremost about power and about fear. Fear of what a world would look like if it would be led by equality. We are not just reacting, also with this report, we are building. We are building across parliaments, we are building in courtrooms, in classrooms, in rural villages. We are building in war zones. Women indeed are rising, women are organizing, and women are winning. Even as we are targeted with hate speech, with death threats, with attempts to silence, we will continue, because silence is not an option. Every law passed, every single shelter opened, every young girl who learns to say no because somebody told her that she could say no, every single step is a revolution. We do not ask for permission to live full lives, we demand it. And we will not stop, not until the word equality is no longer a debate about how to live, but it's really a fact for most women. We will not stop until no woman has to choose between her safety and her ambitions. And we will not stop until every voice in all their very beautiful diversity is heard, is respected, and is protected. And as space, we have an important part in this global fight for equality. It is indeed urgent that today we fulfill the expectations placed in us. So I want to thank you for your solidarity in this important struggle for women's rights, because your body, my choice, must be graved at the cemetery of historic faults and ideological dead ends. And it never, never again must revive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you. Dear colleagues, I open now the list of speakers. And first, on behalf of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats, is Céline Thibault-Martinez.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Président, Madame la rapporteure, chers collègues, n'oubliez jamais qu'il suffira d'une crise politique, économique ou religieuse pour que les droits des femmes soient remis en question. Ces droits ne sont pas acquis. Ces mots de Simone de Beauvoir résonnent particulièrement en moi aujourd'hui, comme ils résonnent dans la tête et dans le cœur de toutes celles et de tous ceux qui sont attachés à l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes. Être libre de disposer de son corps, choisir d'avoir un enfant, partager équitablement les tâches domestiques, gagner le même salaire que celui qui a les mêmes diplômes et les mêmes qualifications, vivre dans l'espace public sans s'interroger sur sa tenue ou sur l'heure tardive. Ces droits et ces ambitions politiques qui, il y a quelques mois encore, constituaient la marche naturelle vers l'égalité, eh bien ces droits ont perdu une grande part de leur puissance. Les tensions internationales, les guerres sont devenues un prétexte pour valoriser la force et libérer le discours masculiniste. Tout cela se fait au détriment des femmes et de l'égalité. En janvier dernier, le gouvernement américain a demandé aux entreprises répondant à la commande publique de renoncer à leur programme diversité. Meta, Disney et bien d'autres ont accepté de le faire sans sourciller. 92% des financements de l'USAID ont été coupés avec des conséquences immenses pour les femmes. Au Yémen, de nombreux centres d'accueil pour victimes de violences sont fermés. Au Guatemala, où l'accès à l'avortement est extrêmement restreint, des jeunes filles violées et enceintes sont désormais livrées à elles-mêmes. En Afrique du Sud, en Afghanistan, au Mexique, partout, les ONG alertent sur une situation catastrophique généralisée. En ligne, c'est la violence qui s'abat sur nos filles à travers la pornographie, hyper violente, sexiste et raciste. Alors oui, ce débat est urgent. Urgent car en 2024, selon l'ONU, les droits des femmes ont reculé dans 1 pays sur 4. Urgent car les conflits armés se multiplient et les violences sexuelles en zone de guerre ont augmenté de 50% en 10 ans. Urgent car partout sur la planète, en Europe comme ailleurs, les femmes sont prises pour cible et l'exaltation de la famille traditionnelle est à la mode. Mes chers collègues, ce débat d'urgence, c'est le contexte international qui nous l'impose. Et je voudrais remercier ici la Commission Égalité qui s'est saisie de cette question juste après la CSW. Car comme l'a dit la présidente Polidori lors de notre Commission Égalité de mardi, nous ne pouvons pas retourner l'année prochaine aux Nations Unies sans avoir agi. Remercier aussi Petra Bayer pour son rapport qui présente de façon exhaustive la situation et rappelle notre feuille de route pour agir. Agir aujourd'hui, c'est lutter efficacement contre les violences faites aux femmes. C'est empêcher les violences en ligne et éduquer nos enfants dès le plus jeune âge. C'est garantir l'accès effectif aux droits sexuels et reproductifs. C'est renforcer la participation politique des femmes. Les droits des femmes ne sont ni secondaires ni accessoires. Ils sont au cœur même des droits de l'homme et ils méritent une attention particulière. Simone de Beauvoir nous exhortait à rester vigilantes durant toute notre vie. Je vous appelle à l'être aussi, comme le sera le groupe socialiste qui votera pour ce rapport. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Céline. Next is, on behalf of the European People's Party, Albana Voxi. Albana, have you inserted your badge? Because I don't see you in the computer.
I have.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you, dear President, dear colleagues. We are here today to discuss a report that presents both progress and the backslide in the state of women's rights across Europe. Statistically, the numbers look encouraging. Increased female participation in public and economic life, more women in parliament, more women in leadership roles, more women involved in decision-making processes. But despite this numerical rise, the reality is different. Higher numbers have not translated into better conditions for women. There isn't a correlation. The UN warns, and this is from the report, of an extreme backlash against women's rights even in some parts of Europe. The report highlights a surge of misogyny and masculinism online and offline, escalating violence against women in politics, aiming to silence them. And we have more and more cases lately. Myself and my MP colleagues in Albania face everyday intimidation and threats. Georgia women, Belarusian, etc. We have heard their testimonies these days. Discrimination targeting minority, rural and disabled women, alarming rates of domestic violence. 1 in 3 women in Europe face gender-based violence, 1 in 2 in Albania. Cut to sexual and reproductive health services support, continuation of gender pay and pension gap. And in conflict zones, the authoritarian regime, women are subject to rape, trafficking, and gender apartheid. In Iran, the regime has intensified its campaign against women's basic freedoms, severe restriction of marriage, employment, travel, child custody, and rest. At least 30 women executed in 2024, many linked to domestic violence or protest. Colleagues, there is a growing concern of propaganda via statistics, where numerical representation doesn't represent women issues. Albania ranks among the highest in Europe for women in ministerial and parliamentary roles. Yet, the European Commission latest report, 2023-2024, paints a different picture. What says the report? Ongoing feminicide and weak protective system. Failure to implement the Istanbul Convention, global gender gap, index dropped 6 places, alarming rise of misogynic harassment of women in public. Most gravely, institutional verbal psychological violence against women in politics, coming from the highest levels, Prime Minister, Minister, Mayor, MPs. It's crucial to empower honest, capable, strong, professional women. Women who fight for right and not privilege. And it's absolutely important to involve men in this discussion. There is only one way to open the door for the others and build fairer and better society. We must move beyond the rhetoric. We must act to fully enforce the Istanbul Convention, fund women support programs, protect sexual and reproductive rights, ensure pay, pension transparency. We as EPP support the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Albana. On behalf of the European Conservatives, Patriots and Affiliates, Martina Kempf. Martina, you should insert your badge first. Your badge. And keep it there. You have to keep it there. Okay, now you can speak.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, liebe Abgeordnete, zu dem Dokument Rechte von Frauen in Europa möchte ich wie folgt zu einigen Punkten Stellung nehmen. Anders als es hier formuliert wird, sehe ich keinen Mangel an Zugang zu modernen Verhütungsmitteln. Zu Punkt 12 möchte ich klarstellen, dass es jedenfalls in Deutschland kein Recht auf Abtreibung gibt, sondern verfassungsrechtlich gibt es ein Recht auf Leben von ungeborenen Kindern in jedem Schwangerschaftsmonat. Wenn in diesem Entwurf einseitig nur von Körpern von Frauen die Rede ist, dann übergehen die Verfasser des Berichts offenbar eine Person, nämlich das ungeborene Kind. Darüber möchte ich hier sprechen. Was meinen Sie? Ab wann beginnt das menschliche Herz bereits zu schlagen? Schon mit 3 Wochen nach der Zeugung. 8 Wochen nach der Zeugung sind die Organe, Arme und Beine vorhanden bei diesem Kind. Und 10 Wochen nach der Zeugung können schon kleine Kinder in diesem Modell ein kleines Baby erkennen. Anders aber offenbar als die Verfasser dieses Berichts. Die können können hier kein Kind erkennen, weil das ungeborene Kind taucht nirgendwo auf in ihrem Bericht. Aber gerade als Europarat, der sich mit Menschenrechten beschäftigt, sollte uns das Schicksal von allein in Deutschland jedes Jahr getöteten 100.000 Kindern nicht unberührt lassen. Das sind seit den 70er Jahren 6 Millionen getötete Kinder. Überraschend dabei ist, dass die Hälfte aller Abtreibungen in Deutschland das 2. oder 3. gezeugte Kind einer Familie betreffen. Hier müssen wir uns doch fragen, ob die Familienpolitiken in Europa nicht verfehlt sind, wenn so viele Familien nicht den Mut zu dem 2. oder 3. Kind finden. Und Familien müssen besser gefördert und finanziell entlastet werden. Wir sollen die konkreten Probleme beseitigen und nicht die Kinder, und zwar auch im Interesse der Frauen. Denn kaum jemand nimmt den Druck des Umfeldes zur Abtreibung wahr. Das handelt sich nämlich hier in dem Fall überhaupt nicht um Selbstbestimmung, denn 20% der Frauen im Schwangerschaftskonflikt erfahren einen Druck des Umfeldes. Laut einer umfangreichen Studie der Universität Mannheim von 2021 zu Abtreibungsgründen gaben außerdem 30% der Frauen an, dass der Kindesvater das Kind nicht will. Hier handelt es sich also nicht um Selbstbestimmung. Im Gegenteil, es gibt nichts Schlimmeres, als wenn man dazu gedrängt wird, sein eigenes Kind töten zu lassen. Das ist das absolute Gegenteil von Selbstbestimmung. Das Fazit der Studie ist dann, dass jede weitere sogenannte Liberalisierung der Abtreibung die Interessen jener Außenstehenden begünstigt, also in allererster Linie der Männer. Das kann nicht in unserem Sinne sein. Deswegen werden wir diesen Bericht ablehnen. Dankeschön.
Thank you, Martina. On behalf of the Liberal Democrats, Beatrice Fresco-Rolfo. Beatrice.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je me tiens devant vous avec à la fois espoir et inquiétude. Inquiétude parce que je viens de constater que notre collègue a réduit ce rapport à l'avortement à l'IVG, alors que le thème est bien les droits des femmes en Europe, avancées et défis. Mais en même temps, j'ai de l'espoir car l'Europe n'a jamais été aussi engagée dans l'avancée des droits des femmes. Le Conseil de l'Europe a été précurseur en matière de défense de droits fondamentaux. La Convention européenne des droits de l'homme et la Convention d'Istanbul sont des jalons historiques dans la protection des femmes contre toutes les formes de violence. Nous pouvons être fiers de ces outils juridiques, mais nous ne devons pas nous y réfugier comme dans un confort illusoire. L'égalité n'est pas un acquis, c'est un combat permanent. Au niveau de l'Union européenne, la feuille de route pour les droits des femmes insiste sur 8 priorités majeures. Égalité salariale, santé reproductive, lutte contre les violences, équilibre entre vie privée et professionnelle et représentation politique, et sur le plan législatif, des avancées continuent d'être notables. Mais mes chers collègues, il y a aussi des signaux rouges. Aujourd'hui, une femme sur 3 en Europe est victime de violences physiques ou sexuelles au cours de sa vie. Le numérique devient un terrain de violence, cyberharcèlement, menaces, campagnes de discrédit. Les femmes engagées politiquement sont des cibles de choix. Le baromètre sexisme publié en France met en lumière l'élargissement du fossé idéologique entre les sexes, l'invisibilisation des violences et la montée d'un discours misogyne banalisé dans les médias. Le procès des viols de Mazan en est un symptôme. Une société divisée où l'on oppose systématiquement écoute des victimes et présomption d'innocence alors qu'elles devraient coexister. À l'international, les données de l'UNICEF nous rappellent que la violence sexuelle contre les filles est une urgence mondiale. 650 millions de filles et de femmes ont été victimes de violences sexuelles, de mutilations génitales féminines, de mariages forcés et de crimes dits d'honneur. Alors quand je reçois dans ma boîte mail d'élus des messages me disant que la misogynie est un mythe, que ce serait la misandrie le vrai danger, je suis tentée de répondre. Ce que je reçois, ce n'est pas un débat d'idées, c'est une tentative de discrédit du combat féminisme. Or, le féminisme, ce n'est pas un dogme, c'est une exigence démocratique. L'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes est inscrite dans nos textes, elle est rappelée dans nos jurisprudences. Mais sur le terrain, dans les foyers, dans les rues, dans les entreprises, en politique et sur les réseaux sociaux, elle reste un objectif lointain. Face à cette réalité, les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe doivent agir, puisque l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes n'est pas une lubie, c'est un combat pour la démocratie. Le groupe ALDE soutient évidemment ce rapport et la rapporteure, je vous remercie.
Thank you, Beatrice. On behalf of the United European Left, Sevilay Celenk.
Thank the rapporteur, dear Petra Bayer, and all those involved in the preparation of this report. The report takes a comprehensive look at gender inequalities in many areas, from education to politics, from employment to access to media and technology, from sexual and reproductive health rights to representation in media and politics. It covers a wide range of challenges, including the invisible barriers that women face in all areas of life. The findings of this report clearly show the difficulties of our time. It paints a powerful picture of how fragile and threatened women's hard-won rights remain. These threats sometimes manifest themselves in open attacks and sometimes in systematic steps backwards. For example, Turkey's decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, a groundbreaking international norm to prevent violence against women, is a serious warning of regression in this area. The occasional attempts to target the law of the protection of the family and the prevention of violence against women, which is our protection, our unique protection against women, against violence. The de facto obstruction of access to abortion and the debates on the right to maintenance are also a concrete example of regression in the area of women's rights. Furthermore, symbolic initiatives such as the so-called Year of the Family clearly reflect an attempt to undermine women's achievements by portraying them as an attack on the family with the intention of keeping women trapped in the shadow of the family. In this context, it is crucial to internalize the importance of women's health, safety, and empowerment, as these are directly linked to the strengthening of society and the promotion of democracy. The rise of the authoritarian right has turned women's bodies and lives into an ideological battleground. This erosion harms not only individual rights, but also democratic institutions and the rule of law. This report is not just a diagnostic document, but a call for urgent action. The protection and advancement of women's rights are achievable through strengthened feminist solidarity and international cooperation. Defending women's hard-won gains is a shared responsibility for all of us. It is therefore important that this report is widely discussed and adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Naomi Katsia is next.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you so much, Petra, for your outstanding work, as always. The very fact that we need to have an urgent debate on women's rights underlines the worrying state of affairs that we are in, doesn't it? Women have achieved so much for gender equality, but we all know that what we have achieved is not certain. Especially in times of crises, women's rights are put in jeopardy, and crises we have had plenty. And within the context of wars and conflicts around the world, we must continue to use our voices to shed light on the suffering and disproportionate impact faced by women and girls in these regions. But firstly, I do have to say, where are the men? Where are the men on the speakers list? And while I do express my gratitude to the 3 gentlemen who have chosen to participate, I think this is indicative of the problem in a wider sense. Make no mistake, we will continue to fight for this cause, but it would be so much easier if we had our male counterparts by our side actively participate and be on our side through this cause. Sometimes I start to wonder whether it makes sense to continue having such debates, especially if we are going to continue speaking amongst ourselves as women. But on the other hand, I think this assembly is doing an excellent job in giving women parliamentarians a sense of community, a space to share experiences and create a support system, notably the Women at Space platform. Because unfortunately, yes, harassment, discrimination, hate speech are things most of us have experienced, which begs the question, if we as members of parliament, empowered women, are facing such situations in which we are harassed or discriminated or made to feel like we are this big, just imagine what young girls, vulnerable women, women with disabilities and minorities have to face on a daily basis. Data from the World Health Organization paints a devastating story. Nearly 1 in 3 women and girls worldwide will experience physical or sexual violence during their lifetime. And this, Mr. President, is a crisis in and of itself. Doesn't every girl, every woman, everyone in this world deserve to feel safe? And if I do look at some of the legislation and initiative Malta has enacted over the course of the past few years, a femicide bill, a ban on virginity testing, legislation to allow individuals to request information about a partner's history of violent behavior. These are all very important steps, and I commend them, and I urge other countries to follow, but they also represent a snapshot of the moment that we are living in. Now, legislation is enacted according to social realities, and the reality is that we have so much work ahead of us still. The reality is that when it comes to combating gender-based and domestic violence, sexual health and reproductive rights, and challenging stereotypes, we cannot rest, and we will not rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi. Maria Petruszewska, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished President. Dear colleagues, Mesdames and Messieurs, let me in the beginning congratulate the reporter for her excellent job and excellent report. The Council of Europe has made significant progress across Europe in recent decades by championing many reforms, from combating violence to promoting political participation. Women's rights are human rights. Yet, does a member state of the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, NATO and EU, but by not complying with the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights and by obstructing the European integration, it's undermining the progress, security and human rights of this institution and Europe as a whole. More women are serving in the parliaments and public office thanks to the gender quotas and electoral reforms. Equality between men and women is no longer a distant goal, but an active commitment in legislation processes. Yet, despite these advantages, significant challenges remain. Progress is not linear, and in some cases, we are witnessing backsliding. Gender-based violence continues to plague the society. Despite legal frameworks, women across Europe still face domestic abuse and femicide. Victims of it often lack adequate protection, and justice systems are slow to respond. So what is our responsibility as parliamentarians and as citizens? Closely monitoring the implementation of Human Rights Convention. We must promote political representation and leadership of women at all levels, ensure equal pay, economic security, and safe workplaces. We must also address cyber violence and defend women's freedom of expression. In conclusion, the progress made in advancing women's rights in Europe is real and meaningful, but it's far from complete. We have to jointly reaffirm our commitment to this goal, not only in words, but in action, to make sure that women in Europe live free from violence, free from discrimination, and free to lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Victoria Tiblum, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. For decades, the advancement of women's rights has helped shape more democratic, just, and resilient societies. We've seen growing participation of women in all spheres of life, from parliaments to boardrooms, and this has made our democracies stronger and more representative. But today, those rights are under sustained attack. Across Europe and beyond, we are facing a coordinated backlash, political, ideological, and well-funded, aimed at rolling back hard-won gains. Anti-gender movements, often supported by foreign interests, target everything from reproductive rights to equal political participation. Online platforms amplify misogyny and silence inclusive voices, while that radicalization of boys and young men spreads unchecked. Let us be clear, female politicians are on the front lines of this backlash. They are disproportionately targeted by hate speech, threats, and acts of violence, online and offline. At the Assembly Conference of Speakers of Parliament this past March, we heard a clear warning. These attacks aim to intimidate women, obstruct their participation, and push them back into the private sphere. We must respond with systematic investigation, firm condemnation, and real protection. Because attacks on women's rights are attacks on democracy. We must reaffirm our commitment to the Istanbul Convention, to safe and legal access to abortion, to comprehensive sexual education, and to full and equal political representation. These are not privileges, these are rights, and defending them, it's not optional, it is our responsibility. In 2025, we must not retreat. We must advance clearly, decisively, and unapologetically for the women and girls of today and for the generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Ayşe Bankoglu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I'm pleased to speak today on a matter of urgency and principle, the state of women's rights in Europe. Europe has claimed for decades its leadership in human rights, equality, and democracy. Yet for millions of women, rights remain uneven, conditional, and vulnerable to political winds. Yes, we have seen progress in access to education, health, and legal protections, but let's be clear, progress is not permanent. From wage inequality to institutional violence, from attacks on bodily autonomy to underrepresentation in power, we still fail to deliver full justice for all women. Turkey's withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention is a grave example. It marked not just a legal retreat, but a clear political statement that women's safety can be sacrificed for ideological gain. The consequences are visible. Only last year, 448 women were murdered by men, most of them by partners or relatives. Courts issue mostly lenient sentences. The message, women's lives are negotiable. Alongside this, the government declared this year as the Year of the Family, framing women primarily as mothers. The focus is not empowerment, but reproduction. Policies encourage birth rates, not gender equality. Women are praised for caregiving, but denied the conditions for autonomy. This erases our roles in society as citizens and individuals with dreams beyond the home. Another issue is the gender pay gap in Europe, which is 12% and remains stubborn. Across our continent, women, especially migrant women, fill the lowest paid jobs, often without contracts, protections, or recognition. In terms of equal representation, women hold only 33 of parliamentary seats. True gender equality requires far more than this. This is not accidental, dear colleagues. It is the outcome of patriarchal norms and autocratic governments shrinking public services, attacking feminist movements, and policing women's bodies. We need action, not just words. Reaffirm and fully implement the Istanbul Convention. Enforce equal pay with real transparency, union protections, and accountability. Center migrant and working class women in all gender equality strategies. Colleagues, we must ask ourselves, what kind of Europe do we want? A Europe where rights exist only on a paper, or a Europe where equality is lived, felt, and experienced by all? It is possible. A feminist Europe is possible. But only if we fight for it together. So let's move from symbolic gestures to structural change. Thank you.
Thank you, Aishu. George Stamatis, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to speak in Greece, but in any case, I'm the first man, I think, in this debate.
I don't bother. We can listen to you in Greek.
Thank you. Χαίρομαι καταρχήν που ο φίλος μου, ο Φραντζέσκο Βερντούτσι, και αυτός είναι εδώ για να υποστηρίξει εσάς, που εσείς είστε η φωνή των γυναικών που περιμένουν κάτι από εμάς. Η ομιλία της Πέτρα θα μπορούσε να είναι ένα μανιφέστο. Ένα μανιφέστο που κάποιος δεν θα μπορέσει ούτε να βγάλει κάτι, ούτε να βάλει κάτι. Αυτό που πρέπει όλοι να έχουμε ως άξονα, ως οδηγία και ως προσανατολισμό. Ακούστηκαν εδώ διάφορα. Η γυναίκα έχει δικαίωμα στο να διαθέσει το σώμα της όπως θέλει. Για τον λόγο που τον θέλει και τη χρονική στιγμή που το θέλει. Κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, γιατί έρχεται αυτή η έκθεση? Έρχεται αυτή η έκθεση γιατί υπάρχει ανάγκη. Και γιατί υπάρχει ανάγκη? Γιατί προφανώς μέχρι και σήμερα κάποιες πολιτικές σε κάποια κράτη δεν έχουν πετύχει. Τι παράδοξο. Η Τουρκία, μια πολύ μεγάλη χώρα, που την θέλουμε δίπλα μας, δημοκρατική, φιλελεύθερη, είναι η χώρα που έφυγε από τη Σύμβαση της Κωνσταντινούπολης. Ποιο είναι το μήνυμα στις γυναίκες της Τουρκίας? Είναι το μήνυμα στη χειραφέτηση και ό,τι συνεπάγεται αυτό. Ζούμε σε χώρες που έχουμε κρισμένους πληθυσμούς. Και δεν θα σας μιλήσω μόνο για τις μειονότητες, τις γυναίκες που επιλέγουν να έρχονται στην Ευρώπη. Φανταστείτε μια γυναίκα με ένα παιδί, χωρίς άντρα. Το στιγματισμό που έχει στη δουλειά της, στο σπίτι της, στη γειτονιά της. Δεν είναι μόνο η γυναίκα, και θα πρέπει να είναι μόνο το ενδιαφέρον μας, η γυναίκα να έχει τον ίδιο μισθό με τον άντρα. Θα το καταφέρουμε κάποια στιγμή και αυτό. Το θέμα είναι η γυναίκα να έχει τις ίσες ευκαιρίες, να μην σκοτώνεται επειδή είναι γυναίκα. Γιατί γυναικοκτονία σημαίνει αυτό. Σκοτώνω μια γυναίκα επειδή είναι γυναίκα και γιατί δεν μπορεί να αντιδράσει. Και μην ξεχνάτε, και νομίζω και η ευαισθησία της Πέτρα και όλων εσάς, για τις γυναίκες που είναι κρυφές, για τις γυναίκες που δεν μπορούν να κάνουν άμβλωση, γιατί η κοινωνία δεν τις αφήνει, για τις γυναίκες που δεν έχουν πρόσβαση στην ιατρική και για τις γυναίκες που βιάζονται κάθε μέρα και από τον άντρα και από τον αδερφό και από τον γείτονα. Αυτές οι γυναίκες είναι πάρα πολλές της Ευρώπης και είμαστε εδώ όχι μόνο για να φωνάξουμε για αυτές, αλλά να διασφαλίσουμε ότι κανένας άντρας, καμία θεωρία παράδοσης δεν μπορεί να υπερισχύσει περισσότερο από αυτές τις αξίες που είμαστε εδώ και πρεσβεύουμε. Και δεν είναι τυχαίο ότι μια τέτοια έκθεση έρχεται σήμερα εδώ και σας καλώ να την ψηφίσετε με εισηγήτρια την Πέτρα και παρουσία της Γενικής Γραμματέας της κυρίας Χατζασλίου. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Ευχαριστώ, Γιώργο. Thank you, George. Edith Estrella, you have the floor, Edith.
Thank you, dear President. Dear colleagues, I congratulate the rapporteur. Thank you, dear Petra. You did a very good job. Even in our days, in an European country, in a robust democracy, it is not easy to be a woman. And if you are poor without academic qualifications, living in a neighborhood far from the workplace. It is much more difficult. It is very hard. Despite progressive legislation, achievements and advances in equality, women's lives are still a daily test. Competence, success, ambition, power are rarely considered attributes of women. And yet, they are the majority in universities, obtain the highest qualifications, and come first in contests. But society is more demanding of women. No one questions the merit of men. Everyone questions the merit of women. Invisible, silenced, and distant from power, women are ignored by the media, especially by television channels. The media can help combat stereotypes and inequalities or promote them. It can help empower women or weaken them by associating them with motherhood, the weaker sex, or decorative figures, and devaluing their activity as competent and successful professionals. Hate speech continues to be the main resource for intimidating and silencing women whenever they emerge for anonymity and gain visibility. Misogyny is used in political discourse and is amplified on social media, where insults and threats against women abound. Trump has used it in his political fight against Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. Speaking of the United States, who would have thought that an American president could ban the use of hundreds of words? Trump banned words like abortion, discrimination, female, feminism, gender, equality, and women, to neutralize what the conservative movements call gender ideology. This is having negative consequences on political discourse in European countries. If you are serious about equality, you must stop treating these issues as side conversations. This is not a women's issue, it is a democratic one. To conclude, women should not give up any of the rights that are granted to men. The right to speech, the right to public and media space, the right to participate and make decisions, and the right to make mistakes, which is granted to all human beings except women. Thank you.
Thank you, Edith. And now, Valérie Pilet-Cara.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Chers et chers collègues, alors on a un petit peu les mêmes références avec ma collègue Céline. N'oubliez jamais qu'il suffira d'une crise politique, économique ou religieuse pour que les droits des femmes soient remis en question. Ces droits ne sont jamais acquis. Vous devrez rester vigilante votre vie durant. Simone de Beauvoir avertissait les femmes, ou était-ce une simple prémonition? Malheureusement, elle avait peut-être un don de lire l'avenir. En 2025, nous ne devrions plus débattre des droits des femmes. Ces droits devraient être une réalité. Cette discussion ne devrait même pas avoir lieu. Alors c'est vrai, quand Simone de Beauvoir est née en 1908, il y avait encore beaucoup à faire pour que les femmes puissent être considérées à part égale avec les hommes. Elle ne possédait aucun droit civique dans de nombreux pays, voire dans la plupart des pays du monde, à part en Australie et en Finlande, qui avaient introduit le suffrage universel à ce moment. Elle ne pouvait pas exercer une activité professionnelle, elle n'avait pas le droit d'ouvrir un compte bancaire sans l'autorisation de leur mari, auxquelles elles devaient obéissance. On ne parlait pas d'égalité salariale, de contraception ou encore de droit à l'avortement. Pendant des années, des femmes se sont battues pour que nous puissions avoir des droits, et notamment celui d'être présentes dans cet hémicycle. Et là, je tiens à leur rendre hommage, à toutes ces femmes qui se sont engagées pendant des années pour obtenir certains droits. Leur engagement est extraordinaire et il est aussi à saluer. C'est vrai, grâce à elles, nous avons obtenu des avancées dans différents domaines, fort heureusement. Mais les mots de Simone de Beauvoir résonnent aujourd'hui avec une intensité troublante. Nous traversons une époque où les crises se succèdent, parfois se superposent. Conflits armés aux portes de l'Europe, instabilité économique, montée des extrémistes, recul de l'état de droit dans certains pays membres. Et avec elle, trop souvent, nous observons le même phénomène. Les droits des femmes deviennent les premières victimes silencieuses de ces bouleversements. Les tentatives de remise en cause du droit à l'avortement, le recul en matière d'éducation sexuelle, les violences domestiques encore et toujours impunies, les inégalités salariales persistantes, les attaques contre les militantes féministes, ce ne sont pas des faits isolés, ce sont les signaux d'alerte d'un engrenage que nous devons refuser d'actionner. Être membre du Conseil de l'Europe aujourd'hui, c'est défendre le respect des droits humains égaux pour toutes et tous, lutter contre toute forme de discrimination, assurer la sécurité. C'est aussi porter une idée de justice, de dignité et d'égalité. Et cela exige une vigilance de chaque instant, car les droits des femmes sont le baromètre de la démocratie. Là où ils reculent, c'est l'ensemble des libertés qui vacillent. Il ne suffit pas de proclamer l'égalité, il faut la garantir, la protéger, la renforcer. Cela signifie des lois ambitieuses, des moyens concrets, un soutien sans faille et des ressources suffisantes pour les associations et surtout une volonté politique claire.
Thank you, Valerie. And now is Baroness Sami Chakrabarti.
Monsieur le Président, par respect pour l'anglais tout à fait impeccable parlé dans cette Assemblée par tant de délégués pour qui ce n'est pas la langue maternelle, je voudrais tenter mes remarques en français. Je vous prie d'excuser mon accent et tout autre faux pas. La position des femmes s'est, sans aucun doute, améliorée à bien des égards au cours du dernier siècle, dans les domaines de l'éducation, du travail, de la propriété et de la représentation politique. Mais je crains un important retour en arrière ces dernières années, avec de graves conséquences pour les femmes causées par les coupes dans les services publics concernés, une misogynie ouverte de certains autres responsables publics qui légitiment la violence à la maison et dans la rue, ainsi que la manosphère toxique d'une grande partie d'Internet laissée sans régulation. J'espère que les droits des femmes n'est pas un principe contesté dans cette Assemblée sur la base d'une affiliation politique ou nationale. Je suis la première à remarquer que dans mon propre pays, le Royaume-Uni, le Parti conservateur a produit 3 premières ministres et 4 dirigeantes, et le Parti travailleur, aucun. Mais nous devons aussi prendre en compte l'expérience quotidienne de millions de femmes qui ne brigueront jamais de hautes fonctions. Sont-elles à l'abri de la faim et de la violence? Sont-elles libres de réaliser leur potentiel? Avons-nous raison de dénoncer les abus commis à l'encontre des femmes sur d'autres continents seulement pour ignorer ce commis plus près de chez nous? Lorsque nous réduisons les impôts et les dépenses publiques, prenons-nous en compte l'impact plus sévère de ces coupes sur les femmes, leur richesse, leur santé et leur sécurité? Et allons-nous choisir de ne pas abriter les empereurs des grandes entreprises technologiques qui se croient au-dessus de la démocratie et de la loi. Allons-nous dompter ce continent numérique sans loi et le réguler? Supportons le rapport.
Thank you. And now it is Francesco Verduzzi. Francesco, you're next.
Quando avanzano i diritti delle donne è tutta la società ad avanzare, quando regrediscono tutti noi collettivamente regrediamo. L'emancipazione femminile è una forza dirompente, rivoluzionaria di cambiamento, è una trasformazione culturale profonda della mentalità, del modo di essere di una società e per questo è così importante e incisiva, per questo è capace di scardinare pregiudizi, stereotipi, retaggio di un dominio maschile feudale, mai sconfitto del tutto e che oggi nel tempo di crisi che viviamo riemerge spesso in maniera feroce. I femminicidi non sono mai solo un fatto di cronaca, sono l'emblema malato di un rigurgito reazionario che vuole ricacciare ai margini della società l'universo femminile, la sua portata di libertà, di autodeterminazione. In Europa 50 milioni di donne subiscono violenza a casa, sul lavoro, in pubblico. Le donne sono le prime vittime sul web dei discorsi di istigazione all'odio che sono una forma di discriminazione pesantissima. E c'è in molti paesi un regresso della linea dei diritti delle donne nel lavoro, nelle retribuzioni, negli spazi della vita quotidiana. Conquiste di decenni sono sotto attacco. C'è soprattutto, Presidente, un'offensiva politica ed ideologica contro il concetto stesso di emancipazione femminile. L'amministrazione Trump, a capo di quella che era una grande democrazia, ha cancellato con ordine esecutivo da tutti i suoi documenti parole, veniva detto, parole come femminismo, eguaglianza di genere e appunto emancipazione femminile. Se una cosa non può essere più nominata è perché la si vuole cancellare, annientare. Tutte le donne che erano a capo dei programmi sui diritti del governo federale degli Stati Uniti sono state licenziate. È stato cancellato il programma per il contrasto alla discriminazione di genere nei luoghi di lavoro, sono stati cancellati i programmi per i diritti sessuali e riproduttivi di milioni di donne e ragazze e tutto questo avrà conseguenze devastanti. Saranno le donne più deboli e più povere a pagarne il prezzo. E allora sì, Presidente, è urgente che la nostra Assemblea oggi prenda posizione e ringrazio Petra Bayer, la Commissione Uguaglianza per questo rapporto. È urgente continuare a lavorare con le Nazioni Unite, con le associazioni, con tutti i parlamenti per non tornare indietro. Ho sempre pensato che nel pensiero femminile, quello che chiamiamo il pensiero della differenza, ci sia il nucleo del nostro umanesimo e oggi che tutto questo è minacciato è tempo di nuova consapevolezza e di nuove battaglie. Grazie Presidente.
Grazie Francesco. Bisera Konstantinovska Stojewska is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Poverty, gender gap pay, violence, hate speech, stereotyping are just one of the few concepts easily associated with women. 1 in 3 women around the world experience violence. Only 1 in 6 women report violence, including sexual violence, to the police. 1/3 of victims never talk about it to anyone. 1 woman or girl is killed by someone in her own family every 11 minutes. Over 200 million women and girls in 30 countries have undergone female genital mutilation. 71% of all human trafficking involves women and girls, mainly for sexual exploitation. Women and girls suffered the most during violent conflicts due to inequality and discrimination. They are more at risk of sexual violence, exploitation, and trafficking during war. 1 in 5 female refugees are eternally displaced people and have experienced sexual violence in countries affected by conflict. Over 1.2 billion women and girls live in places where safe access to abortion is restricted. 12 million girls under 18 years are married each year. 130 million girls remain out of school worldwide. Almost 1 in 4 women experienced food insecurity in 2024. It could take another 286 years to remove discriminatory laws for women and girls. Women earn just 77 cents for every dollar men earn. Women spend at least twice as much time as men on domestic work, and when all work, both paid and unpaid, is considered, women work longer hours than men. Over 2.7 billion women don't have the same work opportunities as men, with laws restricting the types of jobs they can do. Less than 15% of landholders worldwide are women, despite most women in the global south working in agriculture. The estimated global gender gap is estimated at 22%, with women earning around 78% of what men are paid. Nearly 82 million women around the world don't have any legal protection against discrimination in the workplace. Women make up just 25% of parliamentarians worldwide. For every female film character, there are 24 men. Women are 47% more likely to suffer severe injuries in car crashes because safety features are designed for men. Women's rights and equality with men in public and professional life as overreaching principles remain broadly uncontested. Besides the slow pace of progress and the fragmentation of political consensus on gender equality, there are new challenges and opportunities stemming from ongoing political, social, economic, and technological developments. Today, violence against women also occurs online, with cyber violence often aimed at women. Trends such as the rise of new digital technologies and AI, social debate on the meaning of gender roles, or increased awareness of the EU demographic crisis define a new social and political context in which women's rights need to be reaffirmed. Fighting for women's rights means you're fighting authoritarianism. And when you take away women's freedom of expression and association, it brings down whole communities, no matter people's gender. The fact that women's rights are human rights, it's not just a slogan, and it's a lived reality. The time for half measures is over. It's time for governments to act now to ensure women have to have an equal seat at every table where power is exercised. That is why this report is very timely and perfectly aimed at achieving equality.
Becerra, you are 4 minutes now. Hripsime Grigorianis next.
Thank you, President. I want to start with thanking Petra for this timely and necessary report, but even more, I want to thank you, Petra, and all our colleagues here for their genuine commitment and their everyday work towards women's rights and equality. Even in our region, traditionally seen as a pioneer for women's rights, for equality, we see a huge backslide in the recent years. What is more concerning is that we have evidence that these attacks are well organized and well funded. A report from 2021 informs us that over 700 million euros were directed to anti-gender equality activity within the European Union. Imagine how much good could have we done with this money. I cannot but agree with you, Petra, that this whole debate is about power. Equality, women's equal representation, and being in decision-making positions would never bring to such democratic backsliding, to such increased threats to security, to these many conflicts and eventually wars we're surrounded in by today. Undeniably, there is strong correlation and interdependency between democracy and women's rights, between security and women's rights. Hence, these attacks on women's rights are attacks on democracy. The report states that erosion of women's rights is witnessed in polarized societies in a time of cultural wars and ideological tensions. I think we need also to add here the wars, the armed conflicts, to the factors contributing to the rise of masculine culture and making it easy to promote ideas of women's traditional roles. So my conclusion here is that we need to fight harder for democracy and peace in order to allow polarization, not to allow polarization and backslide of equality and women's rights. The second aspect I want to draw your attention is the social norms. Every act we do, every behavior we follow is rooted in the approach we have towards any given issue. if underrepresentation of women or violence against women are not seen as negative phenomena that need to be combated against, then certainly taking actions to combat these negative phenomena will simply not be seen as a priority or even anything to worth fighting for. So it will almost be impossible to neither get funding nor support for combating against this. So I would want to attach a great attention to raising awareness about this, informing our societies, talking about this, and lobbying about solutions that we see. And here I want to recognize the role of the Council of Europe's Gender Equality Commission for working on narratives to raising awareness about women's rights. Concluding, I want to express my wholehearted support for each and every point in the call, in the recommendations, in the resolution, and to finish with a quote that to me summarizes the philosophy and the message of the resolution. Let us take steps to transform our commitments into tangible change, as simple as it is. Oh, and finally, my body, my rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. And the last in my list is Yulia Ovsinikova. Yulia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much, Madam Rapporteur, for excellent work. Very, very important. But gender equality is not only a founding principle of the Council of Europe. It's a cornerstone of modern democracy. It's enshrined in our core legal instrument, from the European Convention of Human Rights to the Istanbul Convention. And through this mandate of the Assembly, we carry the responsibility to ensure that the principle is not just an aspiration, but a lived reality across all our member states. Over the past decades, Europe has taken meaningful steps forward. In many of our countries, women today are more empowered, better educated, and more visible in the public life than ever before. Legal protection against discrimination have been strengthened. Women's health, labor rights, and political representatives are increasingly safeguarded in our institutions. So the Istanbul Convention, a landmark initiative of the Council of Europe, remains a pillar of our fight against violence toward women and domestic abuse. And thanks for this mechanism, for the gender quotas, access to higher education, to support women in all spheres. And in Ukraine, this progress is visible in the very difficult time of our period. Amid the full-scale war, Ukrainian women have risen as defenders, decision-makers, community leaders, drone operators, and to tell the truth, give us unique possibility and warm power that we live, that we definitely win in this terrible war. And despite the Istanbul Convention, of course, we have a lot of challenges and problems, but it's very happy that we have possibility to do together with our member states to fight in together. But progress is not guaranteed. It's not linear. It requires vigilance, political will, and solidarity. And the Council of Europe must continue to survive a beacon of human rights, to defender of dignity and driver of gender equality. Let us will be warm power together, and we really, together, definitely win. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. And now I will call Rapporteur Mrs. Petra Bayer to respond to the debate. Petra, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, due to time constraints, I will not respond to everybody, but thank you very much for this really fruitful and rich debate. And let me start with Celine, also thanking you for your valuable additions and amendments to this report. And you are absolutely right. Equality is not cherry on the cream. Equality is something for every day, and that's exactly what makes the substance of civilization, equality. To Albana, I just wanted to respond that yes, indeed, as politicians, we are especially targeted, and I think that the initiative of our former president, Liliane Marie-Pasquier, not in my parliament, is really worth rethinking and re-establishing, because also we as parliamentarians, of course, have problems, have concerns. Beatrice, I want to just tell you that when you say that, thank you for mentioning the roadmap, but also to say that we still have a long way to go, I think that you especially are a role model to show that a single individual MP can really go this way in its own country. And I really appreciate how many successes and how many important steps forward are done in Monaco in the recent years. So thank you very much for your work. And also because Sevilay, and not only Sevilay, also Aishu mentioned Turkey. Yes, indeed. Especially in a country which withdrew from the Istanbul Convention, which is the gold standard of combating violence against women, I'm really happy to see that there is this very strong feminist civil society movement that really speaks out within and outside the parliament, but I think that you are really very strong and that's important. And also men were mentioned, and yes, indeed, we need men as allies and as those who work together with us for a fair world. I would like to contrast the only voice that was against the report, and Mrs. Kemp was against abortion per se because she thinks it's illegal per se. And let me quote the Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And also the equitation of the right of born and unborn is legally not appropriate. Besides that we made development and progress in our society and in our history, and that the right to self-determination of women should be a general right. And I also want to congratulate and cheer Victoria Tiplom from ECPA. Thanks a lot for your opinion. I wish you a long breath and good nerves that you really can also have these debates about self-determination of women within your political group. I think it's really important to convince people and also your colleagues. And finally, let me thank Elodie Fischer and Giorgio Loddo for their important work and contribution and support as always. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Petra. And now I will ask the chairperson of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, Katia Polidori, would you like to take the floor for 3 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues. A few months ago, a large delegation from this Assembly, including our President, participated in the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in New York. Confronted once again with the alarming state of women's rights globally and the real backlash against them, we recognize the urgency of taking a strong stance. That is why we are here now. Council of Europe cannot come back at United Nations without a strong answer. Promoting human rights is a never-ending process. On the one hand, this is because we continue to face real and persistent obstacles. On the other, crucially, because no achievement in this field is ever guaranteed or permanent. This is exactly the reality we are witnessing in recent years. Women's rights are increasingly being called into question, whether for budgetary constraints, a resurgence of outdated views on the role of women in society, or the influence of external actors trying to sow division and discord. But let us be clear, we will not be intimidated. Equality and women's rights remain top priorities for us. Gender equality is a pillar of democracy. There can be no true democracy if half the population lacks equal access to political participation and representation. The same is true of human rights. They only really exist if they are accessible to all equally. The objective of the resolution presented by our colleague Petra Bayer, and thank you, Petra, for your excellent job, and strongly supported by our entire committee, is threefold. First, it serves as a warning that women's rights are under systematic threat and must be actively defended. Second, it issues a call to action to our counterparts in national parliaments and to all those in position of political, institutional or decision-making authority. It calls them to reaffirm their commitment and intensify efforts towards gender equality. Third, the resolution lays out a clear path forward. How do we protect the rights that have been won? By going on the offensive, by demanding more, by aiming high to ensure we achieve outcomes worthy of our values. Equality between women and men remains a value we all hold dear, and it can unite us once again today. Dear colleagues, I call on you, first and foremost the men among us, and then of course the women, to extend an end to our sisters whose rights are under threat because of war in Europe and beyond. Don't throw this opportunity to make the voice of this assembly heard. Just because you don't like a paragraph, have the courage. Vote in favor of this important resolution.
And with Katya's speech, the debate is closed. The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, document 16211, has presented a draft resolution to which 2 amendments have been tabled. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1 and 2 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the committee, be declared as definitely approved. Is that so, Katya? Yes. Yes. If no objects, are there any objects? Yes, please. Would you like to take the floor?
When will the vote start? Right away? Yeah. So then, according to the rules of procedure, according to Article 42.3, I challenge the quorum. Pursuant to Article 42.2, I request the verification of the quorum. Thank you.
So, dear colleagues, as you have heard, there is a request to ascertain the number of members present. If a quorum is not present, the vote on the business before the Assembly will be postponed. I need to know if the request is supported by at least 1/6 of the representatives authorized to vote. That is 49 members from at least 5 national delegations. Will those who wish to support the request please stand up? Quiet, colleagues, quiet. So, dear colleagues, it is obvious, you may sit, it is obvious that the requirements to call for a quorum are not met, as I have already read to you. We therefore return to the main debate. And we were interrupted where I was saying that if there are no objections, so we have seen the objection, and I'm going now to approve what Katia Polidori said, that the amendments would be considered as approved. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16211 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16211 as amended is adopted. Dear colleagues, the next item of business this afternoon is a debate on promoting inclusive participation in parliamentary life, gender equality, accessibility, and inclusive policies. Document 16183, presented by Mrs. Marina Bardina on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. We need a minute to change rapporteurs.
So, dear colleagues, good to continue the day on the important other file. It's the debate on the promoting inclusive participation in parliamentary life, gender equality, accessibility, and inclusive policies. So it is the document 16183 will be presented by Mrs. Mariana Bardina on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. And I inform you that the debate is expected to end at around 5:30. So I call Mrs. Mariana Bardina, rapporteur. You will have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes in the end. Please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, honorable colleagues, it's a privilege to speak to you on a subject that touches the core of democracy and good governance, promoting inclusive participation in parliamentary life. You know, today I see very many young people on the balcony of Assembly, and I hope that they will find today's discussion about women's rights in Europe, about women's and equal participation in parliamentary life very useful for them. Because I suppose that everything we do here, we do for future generations, and then they will come to their national parliaments, or maybe somebody of them will become member of Parliamentary Assembly. It will make their life easier. So their presence here inspired me to tell you a story that when I first time was elected to the Ukrainian parliament, I began to reflect how my colleagues who were pregnant at that time managed both their motherhood and parliamentary duties, especially after giving birth. Many of them returned to work within the first month of baby's life. They actively participated in committee work, in parliamentary discussions, in voting, and they even continued breastfeeding during this period. At that time, the parliament was not properly adapted to their needs. There were no special facilities. Yet, despite these challenges, they managed to balance both motherhood and parliamentary work. When I became mom and started to draft a strategy for our national parliament, what has to be done in parliament facilities and procedures to make it possible to do both motherhood and parliamentary responsibilities. Another experience I would also like to share with you today is about
my colleague who uses a wheelchair. The Parliament was not adequately accessible for people with disabilities, but thanks to her mandate and persistence, changes were introduced gradually and making the building more inclusive and accessible. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the number of people with disabilities increased significantly, both civilians and militaries, unfortunately. Today, I believe it is our responsibility to ensure that these people can live with dignity. And if one day they would be elected as member of parliaments, the spaces, rules, and working conditions must be fully adapted to their needs. The people who elected us expect us to do our job effectively and represent their interest, independent on our private situations, our private life. That's why it's essential to create inclusive working conditions, not only for people with disabilities, but also for parents who wish to combine parliamentary work with parenthood. The same principles should apply to parliamentary staff. Everyone should have the right to organize their life and career in a way that works for them. This is what I mean by inclusive participation in parliamentary life, when people, regardless of their sex, age, or physical condition, are able to do their job because they choose to do so. There should be no barriers, no obstacles on their way. As I mentioned, my national parliament continues to promote inclusivity. Its buildings are equipped with accessibility features. The official website is adapted for people with visual impairments, and discussions are underway about allowing MPs to attend sessions with infants. In this report, I have considered the question of inclusiveness by focusing on gender equality, accessibility, and inclusive policies and attitudes. The draft resolution makes a strong, clear recommendation, and let me go through them briefly. So first of them is to set goals and track progress. First, it calls on member states to promote gender parity in political representation by setting measurable goals, collecting intersectional data, supporting women's networks, and engaging male allies in driving change. Second is to reform infrastructure and procedures. Parliament should ensure their spaces and practices are accessible, from physical infrastructure to parental leave, breastfeeding facilities, and flexible procedures, like proxy or remote voting. Internal policies must promote work-life balance and offer support to underrepresented groups. The third goal is to address political culture. Infrastructure alone is not enough. We must address the culture of politics. The draft resolution calls for codes of conduct to prevent harassment and sexist behavior, mandatory training on gender equality and inclusion, mechanisms for reporting and responding to misconduct, and programs to engage male allies in building inclusive parliaments. So the last but not least, changes inside the political parties. Political parties are the gatekeepers of parliamentary life. The draft resolution recommends that parties reform their internal rules to ensure diverse candidate lists, support mentorship programs for women, and publish data on gender representation at every level. The Parliamentary Assembly itself also should take steps towards inclusivity. That is why it's necessary to take steps such as conducting internal audits, improving accessibility for persons with disabilities, and promoting online participation for members with caregiving responsibilities, including caring for children under the age of 3. At the same time, I want to thank the Assembly for its flexibility during this report's preparation. At the moment, Parliament, I really felt comfortable condition of its preparing. So to conclude, the journey towards gender parity requires the joint effort of government to provide institutional framework, Parliament to reform legislation, internal procedures and infrastructure, parties to ensure equal opportunity and inclusivity within their structure, and of course civil society to keep demanding change and offering support. Dear colleagues, I urge you to support this report and its recommendations and not stop there, but actively implement them in your national parliaments, as well as here, within the walls of our Assembly. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Then we go for the speakers on behalf of the political groups, and we start with the Stamatis Georgios, EPP.
Thank you, Madam President. I speak in Greek. Κυρίες και κύριοι συνάδελφοι, το 2023 στην ορκομοσία της Βουλής των Ελλήνων μας δινόταν η δυνατότητα να καλέσουμε κάποιον. Εγώ κάλεσα τη γυναίκα μου και μου λέει ότι έγινες βουλευτής όχι για να είσαι μαζί μου στη Βουλή, αλλά για να εκπροσωπείς τους ανθρώπους που έχουν ανάγκη. Και επέλεξα να με συνοδεύσουν την ημέρα της ορκομοσίας στη Βουλή μία συνεργάτης μου και μία φίλη μου. Η συνεργάτης μου είναι ένα άτομο με οπτική αναπηρία και χρησιμοποιεί το λευκό μπαστούνι, και η φίλη μου είναι με οπτική αναπηρία και χρησιμοποιεί το σκύλο οδηγό. Ήταν η πρώτη φορά που έγινε εμφανές μέσα στη Βουλή ότι τα άτομα με αναπηρία πρέπει να έχουν δικαιώματα σε όλες τις εκφάσεις πολιτικής ζωής. Αλλά κυρίως να περάσουμε το μήνυμα αν αυτά τα άτομα θέλουν να είναι στην πολιτική ζωή για να αλλάξουν και τη ζωή τους αλλά και τη ζωή των άλλων. Χαίρομαι γιατί αυτή η έκθεση δίνει τη δυνατότητα να δούμε τα κοινοβούλια μας και πιο δημοκρατικά και πιο συμπεριληπτικά. Κυρίως να τα δούμε ότι είναι για όλους τους πολίτες και να δίνουν την ευκαιρία, κυρίως τα άτομα με αναπηρία, να μπορούν να είναι όχι μόνο βουλευτές, αλλά να είναι και βουλευτές και γονείς και πολίτες. Και ταυτόχρονα οι γυναίκες οι οποίες αποκτούν παιδί, είτε μέσα στο γάμο, είτε εκτός στο γάμο, να μπορούν μέσα στο κοινοβούλιο να παρέχονται οι δυνατότητες ώστε αυτές οι γυναίκες να μπορούν να εκπροσωπούν τις γυναίκες, να εκπροσωπούν τον λαό που τους ψήφισε και ταυτόχρονα να είναι και μητέρες. Αυτή η έκθεση που εμείς ως Λαϊκό Κόμμα προφανώς τη στηρίζουμε και συγχαίρουμε την εισηγήτρια αλλά και την πρόεδρο της Επιτροπής Ισότητας, είναι κάτι το οποίο θα δείξει και στους υπόλοιπους δημόσιους φορείς της κάθε χώρας πώς πρέπει να είναι η δημοκρατική, συμπεριληπτική και προσβάσιμη τόπη. Και αυτό για να γίνει πρέπει να ξεκινάει από τα δικά μας, τα εθνικά μας κοινοβούλια, που για κάθε χώρα από εμάς είναι ο ναός της δημοκρατίας. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Thank you. The next speaker from EC, Martin Nacke.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, liebe Abgeordnete, zu dem Bericht Förderung inklusiver Teilhabe im parlamentarischen Leben möchte ich wie folgt Stellung nehmen. Parlamentsgebäude rollstuhlgerecht auszubauen, sollte eine Selbstverständlichkeit sein. Späte Sitzungen von Parlamenten wegen familiären Belangen zu vermeiden, wie hier gefordert, dürfte dagegen aus organisatorischen Gründen in den nationalen Parlamenten schwierig sein. Die Aufforderung, Geschlechtergleichheitsziele für politische Repräsentation aufzustellen, lehnen wir ab. Dies geht unserer Fraktion zu weit. Es muss bei der Auswahl von Politikern nämlich auf die Kompetenz und auf die Erfahrung ankommen und nicht auf das Geschlecht. Außerdem ist eine Geschlechtervorgabe bei Wahlen durch das Volk auch praktisch nicht durchführbar, denn wenn man ein Mehrheitswahlrecht für Wahlkreise hat, dann ist dort automatisch der Kandidat gewählt, der die meisten Stimmen bekommen hat, unabhängig vom Geschlecht. Eine geschlechtsabhängige Einmischung in den innerdemokratischen Prozess der Parteien wäre ein Eingriff in die Demokratie. Aus den Erfahrungen unserer Partei Alternative für Deutschland zeigt sich außerdem, dass in dieser Partei weit weniger Frauen politisch aktiv und Parteimitglieder sind. Möglicherweise fehlt einfach das Interesse bei manchen Frauen auch an der Politik. Bei der Bundestagswahl kandidierten außerdem nicht selten überhaupt weniger Frauen als Männer in unserer Partei, also bewarben sich. Ansonsten mangelt es an Frauen in politischen Führungspositionen in Europa nicht. Wenn man etwa an Frau Meloni in Italien denkt, Frau Dr. Alice Weidel als Co-Vorsitzende der größten deutschen Oppositionspartei oder Marine Le Pen, die als Staatspräsidentin kandidieren möchte. Im letzteren Fall wird die Kandidatur dieser Kandidatin aber durch zweifelhafte Gerichtsverfahren erschwert. Und schließlich sollen die Befürworter dieses Dokuments einfach mit gutem Beispiel vorangehen und die von ihnen gewünschte Inklusion auch für normal gewählte Parteien gelten lassen. Das heißt, demokratische Gepflogenheiten sollten auch gegenüber der größten deutschen Oppositionspartei Alternative für Deutschland gelten. Und diese Partei dürfte nicht vom Vorsitz in Ausschüssen und von einem ausreichend großen Sitzungssaal ausgeschlossen werden. Als letzten Punkt lehnen wir eine Beauftragung von Gender-Lehrstühlen mit weiteren Studien zum Thema des Berichtes ab, sofern das Geld hierfür der Steuerzahler aufbringen soll. Unsere Bürger in Europa haben nämlich weit wichtigere Probleme als die hier im Bericht angesprochenen. Viele wissen etwa nicht, wie sie ihre Stromrechnung bezahlen sollen. Die Anliegen dieser Bürger sollten Priorität haben und deswegen wollen wir den Bericht ablehnen. Dankeschön.
Next speaker is Stephanie Crisper on behalf of ALDE.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Dear colleagues, I want to start by thanking the rapporteur for the truly timely and necessary resolution. It is not about modernizing rules and procedures. It's about making democracy real, to make it accessible, fair, and equal for everyone. It's about recognizing that political participation must reflect the people we serve, not just the privileged group that can afford it. I want to start, especially for my colleague, Madame Kempf, who spoke before, by highlighting one key element in the resolution, the role of political parties. As you said, the gatekeeper of political life. Because it starts with who gets on the list, who's nominated, who's mentored, who's encouraged to lead. If parties are not inclusive in their representation, Madame Kempf, no building or voting system will fix that. And without inclusive representation, the voices in the political party will be too weak to implement working conditions that enable mothers to balance political responsibility with parenting, persons with disabilities to face no barriers, etc. While inclusive representation in political parties can take some time because of the power dynamics in political parties being difficult to reach this aim, other issues raised in the report are simple to fix. And that takes me to the issue of accessibility. My colleague of ALDE, Evgenia Kravchuk, made me aware of the fact that Ukraine has adapted its parliamentary buildings for persons with reduced mobility, with ramps, call buttons, elevators, and hydraulic platforms, and that MPs with disabilities have designated voting places in the chamber. So I can say that the issue of accessibility is, by the rapporteur of Ukraine, more raised to the attention of us other member state representatives. It is still too often in our countries the case that disabled politicians face barriers before they are elected and are treated also then differently to others once in their parliament or council, including not being able to sit with their political party and facing physical and mental barriers from others. For the colleagues concerned, it is, as a colleague yesterday who is concerned phrased it very diplomatically, exhausting. I would say it's unacceptable. Therefore, I hope further work will happen to focus more on equality for disabled politicians in the future, also regarding this building. But for today, let's make sure this resolution is not just adopted, but implemented. Let's build parliaments where women, parents, people with disabilities, and all underrepresented groups are not just allowed in, but are empowered to take part and lead. Thank you.
Next one on behalf of UEL, Fernande Emmanuel.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Chers collègues, le rapport que nous examinons nous amène à parler aujourd'hui de démocratie. S'il y a un domaine dans lequel nous devons constamment nous astreindre à rechercher la perfection, c'est celui de la mise en œuvre réelle et concrète de la démocratie, singulièrement au sein de l'institution dans laquelle nous siégeons. Or, comment pourrions-nous prétendre à la démocratie quand plus de la moitié de la population en est exclue, ou en tout cas, quand les conditions ne sont pas réunies de l'accès et de l'accessibilité pour plus de la moitié de la population à nos institutions et donc à la démocratie? Une institution qui ne met pas tout en œuvre pour permettre la participation pleine et entière des femmes, des personnes en situation de handicap et des minorités ne peut pas se considérer comme pleinement démocratique. Nous confisquons, nous empêchons une partie de la population d'accéder au pouvoir. Ce que ce rapport met en lumière, beaucoup d'entre nous le vivent au quotidien. Les parlements sont encore pensés pour une élite masculine, valide, souvent blanche et bourgeoise. Cette réalité traverse tous les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, elle est systémique. Comment expliquer qu'en 2023, la députée européenne Leila Chaibi n'a pas pu faire reconnaître son congé maternité au Parlement européen? Elle déplorait alors, je la cite, « Ce Parlement est en fait comme un endroit fait pour les hommes et qui n'a pas pris en compte qu'on pouvait être une femme en âge de procréer avec la volonté de procréer et qui pouvait être élue. Pas de vote à distance, pas de procuration, pas de suppléance possible. Même chose pour ma collègue Mathilde Dignet à l'Assemblée nationale française en 2022. Elle a d'ailleurs déposé une proposition de loi pour pouvoir être suppléée pendant un congé parental. Comme si le fait de devenir maire vous disqualifiait pour être élu, comme si on refusait d'admettre qu'un député peut être une députée et être en âge d'avoir une ou un enfant. En France, ce n'est que le 12 mars de cette année qu'a été supprimé le vote par la procédure dite « assis debout » à l'Assemblée nationale. Une tradition, oui, mais c'est une absurdité totale pour les personnes en situation de handicap. Cette réforme a été votée à l'unanimité et a envoyé un signal fort, mais est très largement insuffisante. À ce jour, il faut toujours se lever à l'entrée de la présidente de l'Assemblée nationale française. Autre tradition, autre barrière. L'inclusion ne peut pas être partielle, elle doit être totale. Et ne nous y trompons pas, nous débattons de cela à un moment où la montée de l'extrême droite, des mouvements anti-genre et réactionnaires et de tous les conservatismes menace jusqu'aux droits les plus fondamentaux. Mon groupe de la gauche unitaire européenne remercie et félicite Mme Bardina pour ce rapport essentiel dont nous soutenons les résolutions et qui nous rappelle une exigence que nous devrions toutes et tous partager. Il est temps que nos parlements ressemblent à nos peuples. Il est temps que le pouvoir s'ouvre à celles et ceux qui en ont toujours été écartés. Il est temps que les représentantes et les représentants élus puissent réellement incarner la démocratie dans des conditions d'égalité pure et parfaite et de liberté non faussée. Je vous remercie.
The speaker on behalf of the SOC group is Martínez Luz.
Gracias, presidenta. Gracias, Marina. Sin duda, este informe aborda varios aspectos cruciales para fomentar la participación inclusiva en la vida parlamentaria, pero deberíamos comenzar por lograr que los parlamentos sean realmente paritarios, lograr que el 50% de los parlamentarios seamos mujeres, pero no lo son, porque lamentablemente la mayoría de los parlamentos siguen evitando la paridad real. La democracia debe ser inclusiva y representativa de toda la sociedad, no solo de una parte. Por eso este informe es tan pertinente, porque destaca la necesidad urgente de transformar nuestras instituciones parlamentarias para que reflejen verdaderamente la diversidad y las necesidades de todos los ciudadanos y ciudadanas. Me siento especialmente orgullosa de hablar en nombre del Grupo de Socialistas, Verdes y Demócratas, que llevamos la igualdad en el ADN, y defender el avance en políticas de igualdad e inclusión, porque nosotros avanzamos en igualdad. Es cierta la subrepresentación de las mujeres en los parlamentos europeos, que sigue siendo un obstáculo significativo para la democracia. Por ello, es imperativo establecer metas claras de paridad de género en la representación política. Nosotros, en España, lo hemos aprobado por ley. No simplemente paridad, sino un reto logrado hace años, sino que hemos avanzado con listas cremallera. Esta es la vía. Los parlamentos deben adoptar medidas específicas como cuotas de género y programas de apoyo para mujeres parlamentarias, especialmente aquellas de grupos subrepresentados. Además, es esencial promover redes de mujeres parlamentarias e involucrar a los hombres políticos para que trabajemos conjuntamente en la eliminación de prácticas y estereotipos perjudiciales. La accesibilidad física de los edificios parlamentarios es otro reto fundamental para garantizar la participación de personas con discapacidad y movilidad reducida. Para ello es preciso colaborar con organizaciones no gubernamentales y acordar mejoras. Y, cómo no, establecer espacios adecuados para el cuidado infantil y la lactancia, facilitando así la participación de padres y madres en la vida parlamentaria. Los parlamentarios debemos dar ejemplo, por eso es todavía increíble que estas medidas no estén más extendidas. Para fomentar la conciliación, los parlamentos también deben adoptar políticas internas que regulen las horas de trabajo y permitan el voto online en caso de necesidad. Nosotros en España lo tenemos garantizado desde hace tiempo también. Especialmente relevante es la lucha contra el sexismo, el acoso y la violencia de género en los parlamentos. Existe y es lo más contrario a los derechos humanos que existe. Así que tolerancia cero, códigos de conducta claros y mecanismos de denuncia efectivos, acompañados de sanciones apropiadas. Este informe nos brinda una hoja de ruta clara para avanzar hacia una democracia más inclusiva y representativa. Es nuestra responsabilidad como líderes políticos implementar estas recomendaciones y trabajar juntos para construir un futuro donde todos los ciudadanos, sin importar su género, discapacidad o situación familiar, puedan participar plenamente en la vida parlamentaria. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. That concludes the list of speakers on behalf of the political groups, and we go for the list of speakers. First, Aisu Pangoglu.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Ms. Bardina for her excellent report and for highlighting the urgent need to make our parliament truly inclusive. Also for those of us who fight to be heard and listened to in political spaces. As youth reporter, I must emphasize that age is still one of the biggest barriers to political participation. In most parliaments across Europe, youth representation remains symbolic at best. So often young people are treated as future leaders, when in fact some are already leaders today. Young people, especially young women, young LGBTI persons and youth with disabilities face intersecting forms of discrimination. These are not just theoretical barriers, they are daily realities. Inaccessible buildings, unpaid internships, party networks that shut us out, and online abuse that targets our identity more than our ideas. Political parties bear an important part of responsibility for the current situation and should act accordingly. They are the gatekeepers to democratic institutions, and without youth-friendly reforms, such as mentoring schemes and funding for young candidates, diversity will remain a slogan, not a standard. There is also a growing need to link political inclusion with civic education. Youth often feel disconnected, not because they do not care, but because they have never been taught how to navigate or influence the system. More investment is needed in political literacy, especially for marginalized youth. But let's call it by name. These reports refers to the tendency to mistrust very young politicians, while at the same time ageism against older persons in decision-making institutions is not uncommon. We need to address ageism on both sides of the spectrum, ageism against young people and against older persons. We all need to participate in political and parliamentary life and defend our views on our rights. This is just the basis of democracy. That is why I would like to highlight the importance of intergenerational solidarity. Inclusion is not just about making space, it is about sharing power. We need to move beyond tokenism and ensure that young people are sitting in the table where the decisions are made. Let us remember that inclusive parliaments are not just a democratic ideal, they are a democratic necessity. As a young voice in the Assembly, I call on all of us to move beyond good intentions. Let's commit to building parliaments where every person, regardless of gender, age, disability, background, or identity, can belong, participate, and lead. Thank you.
Perfect timing also. So then next speaker, Ronan Mullen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vice President. Bunrach na hÉireann, the Irish Constitution at Article 41.2 says something quite shocking. It says the state recognises that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good cannot be achieved. And if that were not shocking enough, in the next part it goes on to commit the state to ensure that mothers shall not be required by economic necessity to engage in labour to the neglect of their duties in the home. And if that were not shocking enough, last year, when this was put to a referendum, the Irish people voted resoundingly to maintain that clause in our constitution. And they did so not because they think that the duties of parenting should be confined to mothers alone, but they recognised a hypocrisy of a state that goes on and on about diversity, but which has never managed to sincerely fulfil its obligations to mothers and fathers in terms of the vital duties that they have in the home. And therefore, in approaching today's debate, we should remember that to achieve true work-life balance, legislators must recognise the importance of family time. The informal work done by parents is a positive asset for society, a valuable, freely given contribution that befits the whole economy, but which we never seem to value enough. Current policies focus too much on employment and efficiency, neglecting parent well-being and freedom. And therefore, I think we should shift away from thinking too much about gender quotas, which overlook the burden of unpaid care work, to more family-conscious policies that support shared responsibilities. Because without that, we risk expecting women to do it all without real support. The labour market must adapt to the needs of mothers, not the way around, and the needs of fathers through flexible work arrangements, adapted maternity and paternity leave, enhanced parental leave, diverse childcare options. And parenting should not be seen as a barrier, but as a precious gift and a vital responsibility. And therefore, I think we should move towards get away from symbolic equality ideas to substantive fairness, not to be focused unduly on shallow measurement tools and percentages, but actually what men and women actually want when given a proper choice. We in our Parliament have a long way to go yet. We have had a forum on family-friendly and inclusive Parliament, but until such time as we're looking at proxy voting and at better and more reasonable working hours for parliamentarians and those who support them, we're not making the progress we need.
Continue the debate. Next one is Alexandra Schoss.
Madam President, dear colleagues, on behalf of my party, I welcome this debate. But let me say clearly, inclusion is not about ticking boxes. It's not about enforcing one model across 46 countries. Inclusion must reflect who we are, our identities, our traditions, our languages, and our democratic choices. In Luxembourg, we have taken concrete steps to make political life more accessible, from ballot design and polling stations to adapting our parliament. We've worked with civil society and disability organizations to make sure people are not excluded. That's subsidiarity in action. Today, 21 out of 60 MPs in our parliament are women. That's progress. I want, however, to be clear on this point. As a woman, we shouldn't push women into politics through quotas or artificial targets. They should enter because they choose to, because they are motivated, qualified, and want to shape public life on their own terms. That's what authentic equality means. Freedom of choice, not forced representation. In Luxembourg, we have identified a real legal gap. Right now, pregnant and breastfeeding MPs are in a grey zone when it comes to parental rights. That's unacceptable. So we are proposing concrete reforms. Parental leave written into our rules and full pay during leave. We also want to make our parliament more family-friendly, with breastfeeding rooms, childcare spaces, even allowing infants into plenary sessions when needed.
In Luxembourg, we have taken small but meaningful steps, like allowing remote participation for MPs who are pregnant or ill. This isn't ideology, it's practicality, and it's backed by our new constitution. But while we support equal rights, we must also speak honestly. Inclusion must not become a tool for ideological conformity. In my party, we believe in fairness, yes, but we also believe in reality, biological reality, cultural identity, and the importance of democratic pluralism. So let's be clear. Inspiration is welcome, imposition not. Every country must remain free to shape inclusion according to its own values and realities. That's what democratic legitimacy demands, because in the end, inclusion is not just about access, it's about meaningful participation. That means civic education. It means open debate, and it means empowering every generation to shape Europe's future with confidence and responsibility. And let us strengthen trust into democracy by making our parliaments more accessible, more responsive, and more connected to the people they serve. Colleagues, democracy is not made stronger by consensus alone. It is made stronger by listening, by disagreement, and by the freedom to decide for ourselves. Let us build inclusive institutions, but let us also defend the values that make inclusion worth having: dignity, diversity, and democratic freedom. Thank you.
Next speaker is Larissa Bilozza.
Madam President, dear colleagues, first thank you to the reporter, our colleague Marina Bardina, for bringing reality into this assembly. This report speaks the truth, plainly and with the weight of lived experience behind it. I especially appreciate this report, the most pragmatic report I have ever seen in this issue, that it was authored by Ukrainian women, because know what transformation look like when women are trusted when institutions adopt. I speak today as a member of Parliament, but also as a mother of 3 children, dared to give birth to a child during the wartime. And as well as Marina did, as Lisa Jesko, and as well as Maria Mesenthal, that just recently in a bomb shelter gave birth to a beautiful son. And Ukrainian women have held this country together. They command military units, they run municipalities, they evacuate their families under fire, and return to draft laws. We often discuss equality in theoretical terms: childcare, flexible schedules, inclusive buildings, but for many of us, these are daily decisions between work and life balance and exhaustion. That's why I fully support the provisions in this report that call for remote participation during emergencies, because war doesn't wait for quorums, that call for childcare facilities within parliaments, because many of us bring our children with us, because we have no other choice. And I remember first day after full-fledged invasion, when we came here, 9 women, without men from delegation, because they had to stay at home to protect our country. And I remember how we shared with Marina one jacket. And actually, after I had the speech, how my children were loved into the hemicycle. And I thank Despina that did it for me. And actually, a lot of you colleagues approached that day me and proposed to welcome my children. And actually, a former head of our committee, of Secretariat of Committee on Social Affairs, welcomed my children for 2 years. And I know that Madam General Secretary Despina also welcomed children, a Ukrainian family, and actually she also established a school for my children. So thank you for your humanity and solidarity, especially for those women with a big heart. This resolution doesn't... This something rare. It doesn't idealize women participation. It identifies the real obstacle: rigid schedule, toxic debate, lack of support, and it offers practical solutions: proxy voting, parent-friendly hours, breastfeeding rooms, zero tolerance to harassment. Inclusive parliaments do not lower the bar, they raise the standards. Because when you design institutions around care, around diversity, around responsibility, you build systems that reflect the people we serve in our countries. Thank you.
Next one, Naomi Sasha.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Rapporteur, for the report. We are making reference also to gender equality in national parliaments. And the challenge here, I guess, is twofold. It's getting more women to parliament and safeguarding the women in parliament. I come from a country which has recently enacted constitutional amendments which allocate additional seats to the underrepresented sex as a temporary measure to get more women in parliament and give them the visibility and exposure required to get them at the decision-making table on their own steam, which has evoked, obviously, many different opinions, and I will not delve into it now, as I think it deserves its own discussion. But in the run-up to the introduction of these amendments, I remember we had described gender quotas as a necessary evil. And even that, although we did say that with the best of intentions, now I do say to myself, really, evil. No wonder a lot of people have come to resent almost the women who were elected via quota, because words matter and really need to work harder to change the narrative. But speaking also about accessibility and infrastructure, with which the resolution and the memorandum refer to, I make reference to our own parliamentary building back home. A new, very imposing, modern building right at the entrance of our historical capital city, which turns 10 years old this year, and I know several of you have already visited. And quite clearly, Madam President, it was designed by men for men. I have no other way of putting this. And even worse, by men who believe or seem to believe that they or other men do not have any parental responsibilities, because no allocation was made for family rooms or childcare facilities when designing this brand new modern building. And so we have had to provide childcare facilities for our MPs in a separate buildings, but it is obviously so exhausting to see how the very basics are not an integral part of our planning even today. It is so disheartening to see that the building housing our highest institution doesn't, at face value, represent what our society should be, which is inclusive. And I don't tend to believe that this alone is a factor that hinders women or men from entering political life. It just makes life that much more difficult. Something that the report doesn't mention, but I believe can be very important in this context, is mental health services within our parliamentary structures. This is something I truly believe in. We need to set an example. We do speak about work-life balance. We speak about prioritizing mental health at work. Parliament is our workplace. Parliamentarians are humans, humans with very stressful, very demanding jobs, and we need to recognize mental health as well as a factor in the full participation and the accessibility and inclusivity in parliamentary life. And so we need to push for the introduction of policies or services specifically aimed at supporting the well-being of members of parliament and staff, being access to counseling, mental health awareness training, and peer support networks. But well done to the rapporteur, and thank you so much.
Next speaker, Edith Estrella.
Thank you, Chairperson. I congratulate Marina Bardina for this important report, which addresses a critical gap in our democratic systems, the persistent underrepresentation of women in our parliaments. Parliaments remain male-dominated spaces, not just in numbers, but in culture, in rules, in assumptions. Women, especially mothers, still face structural barriers: the lack of childcare, rights, rigid scheduling, and the expectation that political work must come before family. These are not neutral inconveniences. They are mechanisms of exclusion. This resolution also recognizes that we don't all experience politics the same way. Women from underrepresented groups, disabled people, carriers. Too often we are left out or expected to fit into systems that were never built for us. I especially welcome the call to engage men as allies. But let's be clear, this is not about women waiting for permission. It's about power. Who holds it? Who shares it? And who is still fighting to be heard? Let's be honest. Our institutions were not built with women in mind. When there's no childcare, no breastfeeding space, no flexibility for care responsibilities, who gets pushed out? And who is still expected to sacrifice everything for a seat at the table? Dear colleagues, democracy cannot function effectively when half the population remains underrepresented, particularly in leadership roles. I urge you, support gender parity laws, push for childcare in every parliament, demand codes of conduct that protect women from harassment. And men, yes, especially my colleague males, step up. Don't just say you support gender equality. Use your power to dismantle the systems that benefit you. Thank you very much.
Next speaker, Nika Melia.
The Chair and distinguished colleagues, today we face a critical challenge to make our parliaments truly open and inclusive for all members of society. When we talk about democracy, human rights and the rule of law, we must acknowledge a persistent gap. Many of our parliamentary institutions still do not fully represent the diversity of the people they serve. Representation is not only a question of numbers, it is about real access, safety, and the genuine ability to participate equally. We cannot talk about inclusion without first addressing gender. Across Europe, women remain underrepresented in political life. They face structural barriers, unequal access to funding, underrepresentation in leadership role, and too often harassment in both physical and digital spaces. These challenges are not abstract, they are lived realities, and yet progress is possible. Even in the midst of war, Ukraine has implemented a 40% gender quota in local elections. Today, women lead 24% of ministerial portfolios in Ukraine's cabinet. Women also had 22% of our diplomatic missions abroad. At the local level, women comprise around 35% of leadership roles, and as in smaller communities, this rise to over 41%. These numbers reflect our national determination to build a more inclusive, representative democracy even in the most difficult of circumstances. But inclusion goes beyond gender. True democracy must embrace people with disabilities, young people, parents, national minorities, and migrants. To do so, we must recognize that our institutions were not originally designed for such diversity and therefore require comprehensive redesign. It requires adapting physical spaces with ramps and accessible infrastructure, enabling flexible and remote participation to accommodate caregiving responsibilities, and enforcing zero tolerance for harassment and discrimination through transparent and fair mechanisms. Inclusion is not about charity. It's not about special treatment. It's about fairness. It's about justice. It's about making sure that those who want to serve their countries and are elected to do so can participate fully and equally. Let's take responsibility for changing that. Let's open the door wider. Let's make our parliaments fit for everyone. Thank you.
And the next speaker, Mariam Göka.
Thank you, dear President and colleagues. It's an honor to speak on behalf of Turkey and the AK Party Women's Branch, the world's largest political women's organization with nearly 6 million members. I thank the rapporteurs for acknowledging Turkey's positive practices, including nursery facilities in Parliament, which promote inclusive political participation. Over the past 2 decades, Turkey has made significant strides in advancing women's rights and representation. One of our most transformative reforms came in 2014 when we lifted the headscarf ban. Until then, women theoretically had the right to stand for office, but in practice, this right applied only to certain women. This change was not just symbolic, it restored equal participation for all women, regardless of belief or appearance. While we take pride in these advances, inclusion must be a shared effort across Europe. Yet many European countries still preach equality while erecting new barriers, especially for Muslim women. In several countries, women wearing headscarves remain excluded from public roles, including positions in teaching, public administration, and internships. The UN Human Rights Council defines this exclusion as a triple penalty: for being women, for belonging to an ethnic minority, and for being visibly Muslim. So this is actually institutional discrimination. It silences voices, limits potential, and contradicts the very ideals of inclusion we seek to uphold in this assembly. Dear colleagues, in 2025, Turkey declared the Year of the Family, recognizing that no democracy can thrive without strong social foundations. We believe women's empowerment must respect identity and motherhood, not force a choice between career and caregiving. That's why we offer structural solutions: flexible work options, paid maternity leave, public childcare, and targeted social assistance, over 60% of which directly benefits women. So we observe with concern the rise of cultural currents in Europe that promote gender indeterminacy, radical individualism, and anti-family ideologies under the guise of progress. These approaches alienate children from parents, citizens from roots, and individuals from their biological and spiritual realities. Turkey does not only criticize, it offers a model, a family-based, culturally grounded, inclusive democracy where women can be leaders and mothers without being forced to choose, where children are raised in security, not confusion, and where participation begins at home in a spirit of care, dignity, and shared responsibility. Let us not mistake uniformity for unity, and let us celebrate diversity, not just in identity, but also in values and tradition. Thank you.
And next speaker, Victoria Tiblum.
Thank you, Madam President, honorable colleagues. Promoting inclusive participation in parliamentary life is not only a question of fairness, it is a fundamental pillar of a healthy, functioning democracy. When politics reflects the diversity of our societies, our decisions become more legitimate, more just, and ultimately more effective. Gender equality, accessibility, and inclusive policies must be more than buzzwords. They should guide our practical actions. We must actively remove the barriers, both structural and cultural, that still hinder participation by women, persons with disabilities, and underrepresented groups. For example, accessible childcare like we have in the Swedish Parliament, flexible working conditions, and family-friendly political structures are crucial. When political life is compatible with family life, we open the doors wider for women and men alike to participate equally. However, while I strongly support measures that facilitate greater involvement of women in politics, I also believe that representation must be built on merit, not mandates. Gender quotas may have good intentions, but they risk undermining individual agency and reducing complex identities to statistics. Instead of quotas, let us empower individuals through education, mentorship, and structural reform. Let's ensure that aspiring politicians from all backgrounds, regardless of gender, have the tools, support, and access they need to run for office and to serve with dignity. True inclusion comes not from ticking boxes, but from transforming systems. This is our shared responsibility to create parliamentary institutions where everyone has a real and equal opportunity to participate, contribute, and lead. Thank you.
And next we have Fleur-Delise Osler from Canada.
Dear colleagues, thank you to the rapporteur, Ms. Bardina, for this constructive report, which highlights the need for better inclusion and accessibility, and highlights that the underrepresentation of women in parliamentary life undermines democratic institutions and processes. Canada is a strong advocate for empowering women to be equal decision makers and agents of change in all spheres of public life. For example, the Senate of Canada is an appointed chamber and has been comprised of at least 50% women since 2020. There are currently 57 women in the Senate, representing 54% of all senators. And we bring a diversity of experiences, perspectives, and knowledge to our chamber. 2 months ago, Canada held a federal election, which resulted in 104 women elected to the House of Commons, representing 30% of all MPs. According to the Interparliamentary Union, this number is only a few points higher than the global average percentage of women in national parliaments, which currently stands at 27%. And while advancements have been made to increase women's participation in politics, as well as making parliaments more inclusive overall, much remains to be done. Faced with this reality, we must ask ourselves, what is preventing women and other underrepresented groups from entering politics? I fully agree with the report's approach to these questions. It encourages us to use the tools already at our disposal to promote inclusive democratic institutions. In the Canadian Parliament, for example, we have several initiatives aimed at improving inclusion and experiences in politics. In 2019, the first ever parental leave program for members of the House of Commons was created. And in 2021, the Senate modified its Ethics and Conflict of Interest Code to include a new framework for addressing cases of harassment. In closing, in order for our democratic institutions to reflect the societies we represent, we must strive to ensure that our institutions are inclusive, supportive, and free from any form of discrimination. Esteemed colleagues, thank you for your attention. Merci, miigwech.
Next speaker is Valérie Piller-Carrard.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente de séance. Chers collègues, j'aimerais commencer par remercier Marina Bardina pour son travail important sur le rapport « Promouvoir la participation inclusive dans la vie parlementaire, égalité de genre, accessibilité et politique inclusive ». Aujourd'hui, je prends la parole pour défendre une exigence démocratique essentielle, celle d'une représentation équitable et inclusive des femmes dans nos parlements. Car rappelons-le, sans détour, un Parlement sans femmes n'est ni représentatif, ni légitime, ni complet. Le rapport de notre commission sur l'égalité et la non-discrimination est sans équivoque. La sous-représentation des femmes dans la vie parlementaire fragilise nos institutions et compromet les fondements même de la démocratie. La parité n'est pas un luxe, c'est un droit, et c'est une condition de bonne gouvernance. Effectivement, la participation à égalité des femmes et des hommes à tous les domaines de la vie sociale et professionnelle constitue un enjeu de droits humains. Comme le prouve l'expérience faite par notre Assemblée, où la parité est presque atteinte, les obligations positives en matière de représentation des femmes dans les parlements sont efficaces et peuvent contribuer à renforcer l'inclusivité des parlements. Dans mon pays, la Suisse, Malgré de grandes avancées ces dernières années, les femmes n'occupent encore que 37% des sièges au Parlement fédéral. Au niveau cantonal, la proportion est légèrement inférieure avec 33%. Pour beaucoup de Suissesses, entrer en politique relève du parcours de la combattante. Les défis en termes de conciliation, vie familiale et vie professionnelle sont énormes. Mon pays, en effet, n'est vraiment pas un exemple à citer en ce qui concerne la politique familiale. Il reste encore beaucoup à faire. Comme dans les autres pays, la sous-représentation des femmes dans la vie parlementaire fragilise les institutions et les processus démocratiques. Nous ne pouvons plus accepter que dans nos parlements européens, les femmes demeurent largement minoritaires aux postes de pouvoir. Nous ne pouvons plus tolérer que les contraintes familiales, l'absence de structures de garde, l'inaccessibilité des lieux ou pire encore le sexisme ordinaire et la violence en ligne découragent l'engagement des femmes dans la vie politique. Pour favoriser la représentation paritaire indispensable à la bonne gouvernance, il s'agit donc de mettre sur pied une série de mesures concernant l'égalité entre femmes et hommes, mais aussi l'accessibilité des parlements, mesures qui ont l'avantage d'inclure les personnes en situation de handicap ou à mobilité réduite. Parmi les mesures en faveur de la participation des femmes, je citerai notamment l'autorisation officielle d'accéder au lieu de travail avec des enfants en bas âge ou d'allaiter dans les locaux du Parlement, l'éventuelle mise en place de procédures de vote par substitution ou procuration encore. Au XXIe siècle, l'accessibilité et l'inclusion constituent des impératifs démocratiques. Chers et chers collègues, je vous invite donc à soutenir ce rapport. Il est grand temps que nos parlements reflètent fidèlement les sociétés qu'ils représentent. Les législatifs nationaux des États doivent devenir des lieux de travail inclusifs, exempts de toute discrimination. Merci pour votre attention.
The next I have in the list Jose Maria Sánchez Garcia. Absent. Next is Esther Peña. Absent. And then finally, Observer Canada, Salma Zahid.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I would first like to thank the rapporteur, Ms. Baidina, for this important report. Last March, the global community gathered at the UN headquarters in New York to mark the 30th anniversary of the 4th World Conference for Women, the conference that led to the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. The Beijing document called on governments to remove obstacles to gender equality and the empowerment of women. 30 years after its adoption, despite advancements that have been made towards gender equality, we must acknowledge that progress has been too slow and the gains uneven. At the current rate, the UN has reported that gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be reached for another 130 years. In Canada, following our election last April, more women were elected to the House of Commons than ever, now accounting for 104 members, or 30% of all MPs. Gender parity was achieved among federal cabinet ministers for the first time in 2015, a practice that was maintained following the 2019, 2021, and 2025 federal elections. While efforts have been made to make parliaments more inclusive, we must acknowledge that we remain a long way from true gender equality and inclusivity. In 2019, Canada's House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women presented a report entitled Elect Her, a roadmap for improving the representation of women in Canadian politics. The report highlighted 7 factors that may deter women from participating in electoral politics, many of which echo the findings of Ms. Baidina's report. Among these obstacles was the lack of family-friendly work environments. The committee report noted that such initiatives as parental leave, support for childcare, as well as some changes to internal policies could have a positive effect on all members of parliaments. In recent years, the Parliament of Canada has adopted various measures in line with the report findings. For instance, a few months following the tabling of the report, the House of Commons adopted flexible maternity and parental arrangements. As well, the report identified the possibility of participating remotely in parliamentary work as a way to foster inclusive, family-friendly, and gender-sensitive workplaces. In July 2020, Canada's House of Commons held its first hybrid sitting, where members could participate in person or by the video conference. This flexibility is important because childcare, taking care of family members, and other responsibilities can affect the ability of members and women in particular to participate in Parliament in person. We need the voices of women at the decision-making tables. Thank you.
Thank you. It was pleasant that all who wanted to speak had the floor, and now that concludes the list of speakers. I call now Madam Rapporteur Bardina to reply. You have 3 minutes, please.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for all your comments. I'm really inspired by this discussion. And I want to focus one more time that this report is about right of everyone to do their parliament work. So if person decide to become parent and do parliament work, he or she can do it. If person with disabilities want to continue his career, he or she has to do it. Because we, as parliamentarians, our national parliaments, our assembly, have created appropriate conditions, have created appropriate facilities. I suppose this is extremely important, and this is the basic right we can create for people. I want just to make comments on some issues and say to Naomi, who mentioned mental health, that I'm sure the breastfeeding room, for example, in my parliament could reduce stress level I felt, you know, and can make easier the way I combine my motherhood and my parliament work. Other colleagues mentioned parental and maternity leave. You know, when I wanted to start my maternity leave and was interested in the procedure, I understood that men wrote the procedure and decided and vote how women have to have to start with their maternity leave. Thanks to my Ukrainian colleagues, we changed the rules and it becomes comfortable for women. I'm really proud of my Ukrainian male colleagues because they usually say to me, Marina, you know, equality is a win-win process because we all have different experience, and while we produce legislation, we exchange this experience and make best practices for people to live. If Parliament starts to implement this inclusiveness, we can show our societies that it is normality, that everywhere in public and private life, people have to feel this comfort. And Larissa, thanks really for jacket. You shared with me in the beginning of full-scale invasion when we came in Strasbourg to explain colleagues it was not a moment to think about suits. It was a moment to come here to explain you, to tell with you what is happening in Ukraine at that time. Thank you very much. Thank you, my dear committee secretariat, Carolina, Katya, for your help for preparation of this report. And I really hope we have no obstacles today to support inclusiveness. Thank you.
Thank you. Do the chairperson of the committee, Ms. Katya Polidori, wish to speak for 3 minutes, please?
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Chers collègues, j'aimerais tout d'abord rappeler que le rapport devant nous a été adopté à l'unanimité lors de la réunion de la Commission sur l'égalité et la non-discrimination qui s'est tenue le 10 mai dernier à Paris. Je remercie vivement notre collègue Marina Bardina pour son travail dans la préparation de ce rapport. Je remercie aussi tous les membres qui ont pris la parole pour soutenir ce rapport, y compris la rapporteure pour la jeunesse de notre commission. Comme Marina Bardina le rappelle dans son rapport, nos parlements nationaux devraient être des lieux de travail inclusifs, exempts de sexisme, racisme, agisme, validisme et toutes les autres formes de discrimination. Cela devrait se référer dans nos règles et règlements internes qui devraient prévoir des mécanismes et outils appropriés pour prévenir la discrimination et pour y répondre à travers de procédures adéquates, des signalements et des sanctions. Tous ces points sont repris dans le projet de résolution que je vous invite à soutenir. J'aimerais attirer votre attention sur quelques points importants du projet de résolution, notamment la nécessité de fixer un objet de parité de genre dans la représentation politique dans les parlements nationaux, de procéder à une évaluation de la situation au niveau national et d'élaborer un plan stratégique visant à atteindre cet objectif par des mesures spécifiques. Dans la résolution 2111 en 2016, l'Assemblée soutenait déjà le principe de parité qui représente le but ultime en matière de représentation politique. Des facteurs culturels jouent un rôle déterminant dans la participation des femmes à la vie politique de leur pays. L'éducation et la formation sont essentielles. Elle permet l'acquisition des compétences nécessaires à la remise en cause de stéréotypes persistants qui empêchent d'atteindre une véritable parité. Les partis politiques ont eux aussi un rôle essentiel à jouer dans l'amélioration de la représentation politique des femmes. Ils sont les gardiens de l'accès au poste d'élu et leur choix détermine dans large mesure le résultat final des élections en matière de représentation équilibrée entre les femmes et les hommes. Les projets de résolution devant vous leur adressent aussi un nombre important de recommandations pour améliorer la situation. J'aimerais finir avec quelques mots pour signaler l'importance de rendre nos parlements accessibles aux personnes en situation de handicap et à mobilité réduite, qu'elles soient parlementaires, membres du personnel, aux visiteuses. L'accessibilité aux bâtiments comme aux travaux parlementaires est une exigence de justice. Nous devons toutes et tous promouvoir une participation inclusive à la vie parlementaire. Je vous appelle à soutenir ce rapport et à voter le projet de résolution pour adresser un message fort à nos États membres. L'accessibilité et l'inclusion constituent des impératifs démocratiques, plus que jamais au XXIe siècle.
Thank you, Chair Polidori. The debate is now closed. The committee has presented a draft resolution to which no amendment has been tabled. So we will proceed to the vote on the draft resolution contained in document 1618.3. A simple majority is required. I open the vote.
Everyone's voted.
Vote is closed.
The resolution is adopted.
And we see the result, and we can declare the resolution is adopted.
The President is here and will take the chair. Yeah.
Dear colleagues, please be seated. We're about to start. The next item of business this afternoon is a current affairs debate on a call for the immediate release of persons facing politically motivated persecution in Georgia. Speaking time is limited to 3 minutes for all members except the first speaker chosen by the Bureau. The debate is expected to end at around 6:15. I call Mr. Stefan Gethins. Dear Stefan, you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes to reply. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you to you and your colleagues for time here today. This is a serious debate for us, but a particular serious debate for our friends in Georgia, in our beloved Sakartvelo. The Convention and the rights that we enjoy are not simply as a result of us living on the continent of Europe. Being a state in Europe does not make you a member and does not grant you rights, as Russia and Belarus are well aware. That's why we as parliamentarians are here today. The conventions affect the lives of our citizens, to whom we are accountable in the normal democratic way. But there's a condition. Last night, President Zelensky, in his outstanding contribution to this chamber, told us that there is one condition to membership, but it's an important one, a crucially important one, is that we stand for democracy and human rights. And we should guard that condition absolutely jealously. Indeed, we all, regardless of whether we agree with each other or not, have a responsibility to do that. Now, Georgian leaders have told their people that they want to accede on the European path, and that EU membership and continued membership of this place is, and I quote, a top priority. Well, Mr. President, no wonder. The Council of Europe, the European Union, have built a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity across Europe. They've made us wealthier, fairer, safer, and both are needed more than ever. And that's sometimes difficult, and sometimes at times we forget that. But you don't get into a club for nothing. You must respect democracy. That's hard sometimes, and we all know that. We're politicians. We know that respecting democracy and the democratic process can be difficult. The path is hard, but it's worth it. Now, colleagues, the jailing of opponents and suppressing dissent is the opposite of what this place stands for. And we must stand against it and send a message that, yes, all European states are welcome, but they must abide by the rules. And in that regard, Mr. President, I recall our resolution 2600 earlier on this year that called for the immediate release of political prisoners and also expressed the concerns of this chamber of arrests and the abuse of legal processes in Georgia. And that's worthwhile remembering today. We must allow all our Georgian colleagues to engage in democratic politics and also to allow them to engage with this place and with the Council of Europe without any fear or favour whatsoever. Can I say and put it on the record that if anyone is punished for attending the Council of Europe and engaging with elected politicians from across Europe, we must treat that with the utmost seriousness. But let's not forget the price that many Georgians are paying for their engagement in the democratic politics and the exercising of rights that so many of us take for granted. There must not be politically motivated prosecution, including for Zurab Japaridze, Nika Melia, Nika Mamuka Kazaradze, Georgi Vashadze, Badri Japaridze, and other persons who are facing politically motivated prosecution in Georgia. Let me recall the words of Marta Koss, the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, that the arrest of opposition voices is an attack at Georgia's democratic foundations, which are being eroded by the day. That's serious, and we should take it seriously. Anita Hipper, a spokesperson for foreign affairs and security policy at the EU, said the politically motivated persecution and arrests of opposition leaders go against basic democratic values. These are authoritarian tactics opposite of what we expect from an EU candidate country. There must be inclusive dialogue, and that's something that the UK and the OSCE have called for. Inclusive dialogue, political parties, civil society, peaceful and democratic solutions which are so precious to all of us in this place. Friends, our rights, our European rights, and this is a lesson of history, and you've often recounted history, Mr. President, and quite right too. Our rights that we take for granted are hard-won, but they are the foundations of a democratic Europe. Europeans, on the whole, enjoy greater democratic and other rights than at any other point in history, but it's fragile. And if we turn a blind eye to them there, where does it end? We cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the suppression of these rights anywhere in Europe. Nobody knows better about that than our Ukrainian friends, who at this very moment are spilling their blood in their own country to defend their rights, their democratic rights, and defend their democracy. And last night, President Zelensky said an awful lot, thank you to us. The thanks should have been the other way around, and I say thank you to our Ukrainian friends because you give us that example, and I'm grateful to you. Democracy is fragile. These rights are fragile. So in terms of Georgia, we have a responsibility to our friends in Georgia and all those who aspire to the rights that we enjoy. So today I'm asking colleagues that we must make a stand and ensure that these rights, these democratic rights, are defended. And where better to do so than in this place, to a place that for decades has defended democracy and our human rights across our shared continent, regardless of our differences. Mr. President, thank you for your time today, and thank you to those colleagues as well.
Thank you, dear Stefan. Yes, you're absolutely right. Democracy is hard, but the lack of democracy is even harder. So, I open the list on behalf of Liberal Democrats, Eric Niels Cross. Eric, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, my speech will not be for the faint-hearted, but neither is the situation in Georgia today. And my question to you is, what else needs to happen in Georgia before we actually stand up and do something about it? I mean, I would, of course, also like to ask you to call the events with the right words. We use the word democratic backsliding. It's not democratic backsliding. What we are watching in real time is a Russian-style, probably also Russia-directed, Russia-assisted takeover of Georgia. It's a state capture by an oligarchic, autocratic regime inspired and controlled by Moscow that is unfolding under our watch. And the Georgian people have been demonstrating peacefully for more than 200 days now under European flags. None of their demands and requests have been met, none. And what have we done? In January, this assembly ratified the credentials of the Georgian delegations conditionally. And there were 4 main conditions: release political prisoners, reverse the repression of civil society, investigate police violence, and most importantly, announce new parliamentary elections. And what has been the response? Well, the Georgian Dream delegation left the assembly because their feelings were hurt, and the regime has escalated. There is no compliance whatsoever, just the opposite. Bidzina Ivanishvili and his so-called government are dragging Georgia 180 degrees in the opposite direction, from democracy towards dictatorship. Georgian Dream is rapidly consolidating authoritarian power. This week alone, 7 opposition leaders were arrested and sentenced, banned from political activity, which means they can't participate in elections. The names were, some of them were mentioned. I mentioned one more, Givi Targamadze, who has been already sentenced in absentia in Belarus, who is charged in Russia, who was almost blown up by the Kadyrovite Chechens, is now facing criminal charges in Georgia. So those are the friends of the regime. So let's be absolutely clear. If we do not respond now, we will be complicit. Silence is no longer neutrality. Silence is betrayal. So we call for immediate targeted sanctions against all Georgian Dream officials, ministers, MPs, judges, police, and their enablers and their families. We call on decent officials, civil servants, and police officers in Georgia resign and join the people. We call for an interstate case against Georgia, just like was in the European Court of Human Rights, just like was done against the black colonels of Greece once, for grave violations, because Georgia is at the brink of becoming the next captive nation, just like Belarus is today and half of Europe was before. And this would be a victory of Russia and Ruski Mir, and a defeat for Europe and this assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. On behalf of the United European Left, it is the co-chair of the party, George Lukaidis. George, I didn't have the opportunity until now to congratulate you on your election as the co-chair of the United European Left. I wish you all the best, and I'm sure that we'll have a very good and fruitful cooperation. I will call my colleagues to applaud your election as a leader. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by saying that it would have been more constructive if our interventions today were heard by the Georgian delegation, giving them the opportunity to respond. Our position has always been to promote dialogue and inclusivity. Without such engagement, how can we ensure that both statutory organs act in synergy, not unilaterally, when addressing clear violations by a member state? In January, the majority of the Assembly sanctioned the Georgian delegation and challenged their credentials. Despite our assessment that the irregularities of these elections were no different from previous elections, we called for new ones. The delegation then withdrew. My group opposed this approach, warning it would lead to deadlock, which, regrettably, is where we stand now. However, it is important to remember that the October 2, 2024 parliamentary elections in Georgia sparked widespread public unrest. While opposition parties denounced the vote as fraudulent, the government maintained that it was conducted lawfully. Protests followed, some of which did involve violence. The Ministry of Internal Affairs reported over 100 injured officers and dozens of cases of arson and assault on public buildings. These events are serious, and it is acceptable that they will be investigated and prosecuted within the law. At the same time, credible reports by the Public Defender, Human Rights Watch, and the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights point to disproportionate use of force by police, including beatings, mass arrests, and alleged torture of detainees. Over 400 individuals were detained in connection with these protests, and dozens remain in custody. There is growing concern about politically motivated prosecutions targeting figures such as Mikhail Saakashvili, Nika Melia, Zurab Japaridze, Mzia Amaglobelli. We must uphold the principle of equal justice. Violence by protesters cannot justify systemic repression, nor can public protesters not public order concerns excuse violations of Article 5 or 10 of the Convention. Georgia, like all Council of Europe member states, is obliged to safeguard the right to peaceful assembly, fair trial, and humane treatment in detention. We also note that criticism toward Georgia is at times intensified by geopolitical considerations. The country's current non-alignment posture must not result in unequal scrutiny compared to other member states. Human rights must be upheld universally, but assessed consistently. We therefore call for the immediate release of all individuals held without evidence of violent conduct, access to independent medical care for Mr. Saakashvili, independent investigations into all allegations of abuse, and the repeal of legislation that undermines freedoms of expression and association.
Extra time was a gift for your election. Thank you. Petra Bayer on behalf of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats.
Thank you very much. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit Democracy Index 2024, Georgia recorded the 4th largest deterioration in democracy worldwide and the sharpest decline in the South Caucasus region. For over 200 days, ongoing protests have been taking place demanding new elections. The government, led by Georgian Dream, has imposed with a series of repressive measures, such as restrictive legislation changes, increasing criminal prosecution, and sometimes harsh penalties against demonstrators, civil society, and prominent opposition figures. The names have already been quoted. There are just weak signs that the protests will lead to political change in the end. Nevertheless, a core group of about 1,000 or 2,000 people continues to mobilize every evening for protests around the parliamentary building. However, there have been numerous arrests. The most prominent case to date was that of Mzia Amaglobli, a founder and director of the independent media outlets Batam Lebli and Net Gazeta. She was arrested for putting up a protest sticker and allegedly slapped a police officer in Batumi. The Georgian Dream has passed numerous laws aimed at taking a more restrictive approach to protesters. These include increasing fines and prison sentences, and even the introduction of new criminal offenses such as treason. In December 2024, for example, the administrative fine for blocking a road was increased from the equivalent of 180 euros to 1,800 euros, which is simply intended to distract people from speaking out for their fundamental rights. Our answer must be a clear one. There is a red line inherent in our common values, and to imprison people because they want to enjoy their fundamental human rights like freedom of expression and freedom of speech is definitely a no-go. It was reminded for all the preconditions we have taken to have the Georgian delegation back in our assembly, and the problem is that there are no positive signs at all at the moment. So I'm really not very hopeful that there will be a fundamental change and that the Georgian delegation will come back soon, but we should not give up hope and try to put even more pressure on them to have new elections, to investigate on all the violent actions against activists and demonstrators, peaceful demonstrators, and of course to release all political prisoners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra. On behalf of the European People's Party, Taike Panem. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, let me begin by sharing a personal experience. Last year, on the 26th of October, I had the privilege of serving as an OSCE election observer in Georgia. What I saw was a country of extraordinary beauty, filled with warm and welcoming people. It is no surprise to me that so many wish to represent Georgia, to lead it forward and to guide it toward a brighter future. The Georgian Dream Party promised the people a modern European future. Across the country, the European flag became a powerful symbol of hope, a reminder of what Georgia aspires to be. A modern European country is built on respect for human rights, freedom of speech, and robust democratic process. But the path to democracy is not always smooth. The election process was marred by intimidation and other unfair practices, as reality that has been thoroughly discussed here. Since those elections, we have seen democratic values and human rights come under even greater pressure. Journalists and opposition members have faced intimidation and imprisonment simply for expressing their opinions. Let me be clear. Silencing voices is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of weakness and uncertainty. Strong leaders are not afraid of dialogue. Strong leaders do not fear the voices of their people. They welcome debate because they know that a free society is a stronger society. To the leaders of Georgia, I would ask, do you want your citizens to live in fear and bowing to power? Or do you aspire to be honored and respected, guiding your country towards a future of freedom and prosperity? Remember, the people are not blind to the choices before them. They deserve leaders who have the courage to admit mistakes, to release those unjustifiably imprisoned, and to embrace the principles that define a modern democratic society. Let us stand together for a free and democratic Georgia. Thank you.
Thank you, Teke. Peran Moon is next.
Muraz, thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak on this matter of grave concern. I was going to be speaking specifically about the politically motivated detention of Zurab Japaridze and Nika Melia. But while the world's attention has been grasped by events in the Middle East, the discredited Georgian government has used this moment to escalate the suppression of democracy in that country. It is now crystal clear that the detentions of Zurab Japaridze and Melia on minor procedural charges are part of a much broader campaign of repression. In fact, 6 opposition leaders have been arrested in the last few weeks. As Zurab Japaridze was led away in handcuffs, he declared, "In the end, we will win." That is the spirit of a man who believes in freedom, even when he was silenced by force. That is the voice of a man that needs to be heard across this hemicycle and throughout Europe. And these arrests can no longer be described as isolated. We must add to the list of political prisoners Nika Melia, the 3rd opposition leader detained. And then on Wednesday last week in London, I met Badri Japaridze, leader of the opposition Lelo Party, who outlined to me the laws that have been passed to restrict media freedom, civil society, and the right to peaceful assembly. Japaridze told me that he too was heading back to Tbilisi to face what he felt was a minor jumped-up charge from a kangaroo court from which he was expecting a fine. Instead, on Monday this week, Badri Japaridze, along with his co-leader of the Lelo Party, Mamuka Kazaradze, were sentenced to 8 months imprisonment and barred from holding public office for 2 years. These are not just opposition figures. They are symbols of Georgia's democratic aspirations and the growing resistance to orchestrated authoritarianism. Friends, I have to tell you that time is fast running out, and the time for us to act is now. We are well into the 11th hour for Georgia. If we are serious about supporting those who bravely resist political persecution in Georgia, we must target those responsible for this repression, not just with words, but with actions. That means freezing their assets, restricting access to Western education and institutions, and denying them the luxury of holidays and safe haven abroad while they dismantle democracy at home. The so-called Foreign Agents Registration Act criminalises unregistered NGOs, while the successor party's law effectively bans opposition parties ahead of the October municipal elections. The United Kingdom has responded with sanctions, targeted judges, ministers and police chiefs complicit in corruption and repression. It can be done, but we must apply pressure. The curtain on the democratic future of Georgia is being drawn. As members of this assembly, we have a duty not to look away. The Georgian people are pleading for our help. We must stand in solidarity with them. We must call for an immediate release of all political prisoners in Georgia. At the moment when the Georgian people need us most, let us not turn our backs on them.
Thank you, Peran. Christophe Brico is next. Christophe. Where is Christophe? He's not here? Okay, then I will go to Oleksiy Goncharenko. Oleksiy, I see that you have moved to the center. Is it related to President Zelensky's visit, or it's just happens?
Dear President, it's just too bad to see you.
I'm so honored. Thank you, Oleksiy.
Thank you. My dear colleagues, we are now discussing an extremely important issue, Georgia. And yesterday here in this hall, we welcomed President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, who spoke, who made an address, but before this, who signed the agreement about establishing of special tribunal. Really historical moment, tribunal for aggression. But you know what? There are 6 countries from member states which did not sign this agreement. And one of these 6 countries is Georgia. And Georgia is the victim of Russian aggression itself. 20% of Georgian territories are occupied by Russia, almost the same number as in Ukraine. Georgia was even earlier victim of Moscow regime, of Kremlin, than we were. And after this, Georgia is not supporting the tribunal against Russian aggression. Can you imagine this? So the question is, for whom Georgian government really work? Who is their masters? When they jail opposition leaders, it's not the voice of Georgian people speaking, it is Kremlin whispering. Georgian people deserve leaders who stand shoulder to shoulder with them, not with Putin. And that's exactly what's happening right now. Yes, there is a part of blame on all of us. In 2008, it was a moment when Ukraine and Georgia were standing in the doors of NATO, and NATO said, yes, we will let you in, but we don't know when. Many people did not understand what's happening. Putin understood clearly. And from 2008, he started the war against Georgia, then against Ukraine. He is destroying these countries. He's trying to kill all of us. He's trying to occupy these countries. And now he's taking Georgia in a hybrid way, because his tanks are too busy in Ukraine. That's why it's not tanks, but it's a puppets. It's in Russian agents who are doing this attack on Georgia. It's not Bidzina Ivanishvili. We should call him Lukashvili, because he is doing Belarus from Georgia. It's exactly the way of Belarus, which lost democracy at first and then statehood. And now it's in reality occupied country. That's what's exactly happening with Georgia right now. Just several months ago, we here met with Georgi Vashadze, other Georgian leaders who are now in jail. Now in jail. Just imagine, my dear colleagues, we met with them, we handshaked with them, we said to them, Sakartvelos Gaumarjos, and now these people are in jail. We need to do everything we can to save Georgia from Moscow, to give Georgia back to Georgian people. Sakartvelos Gaumarjos.
I'm not sure that I understand the last 2 words. Do I need to know? I mean, the last 2 words, you said something in your language?
No, it's in Georgian, meaning that long live Georgia.
Ah, okay, long live Georgia, okay.
Georgia.
Because I remember last time that you said something in another language, it was a bit
I know many languages.
Problematic.
President.
So, my dear Leslie, Lord Griffiths has the floor now. I haven't heard of you for a long time now.
Well, President and members, I have to say that passion plus facts have spoken for themselves. I'm a Welshman. Any invitation to make a speech, I accept with alacrity. I can usually fill any amount of time. But on this occasion, I'm more than happy to rest my case that I might have made in the words that have been made and in the passion that has been shared. Following Alexei, where's he gone, by the way? You see, we have a principle.
He moves to the left.
Yes.
I don't know where is he now.
Well,
I'll tell him later.
Well, it's simply that when we have a debate in the House of Lords, all speakers are obliged to stay throughout the debate. So I just looked expectantly. But for all of that, the words have been said. We've had 3 meetings with Georgian delegations that I've been part of in the last, well, since this year began. And on each occasion, I start by asking, what's happened since the last time? And it gets worse and worse. And all I can say is that I dread coming in September, October, to meet them again and to ask them once more what's been happening. There are local elections coming up about that time, and who knows what's going to happen to that if a similar depredation of powers and opportunities and freedoms happens between now and then. My perplexity about this council, which I feel so honored to be part of, has always been, how do we take our fine words and put them into action? In many cases, I understand the needs of bureaucracy and all the rest of it. But there come moments when things are happening so fast and people are suffering so greatly that all our fine words and all our overflow of powerful emotion are not enough. So I wonder whether we can take those 4 things that Mr. Cross mentioned in his speech, whether we can distill the energy that it was in my colleague, Brother Moon here, and Alexei, the absent one, in his speech, so that we can add objectives to passion, to energize a course of action that will, by September, October, allow us to see something that may have happened for the better. You'll notice, Mr. President, that with 11 seconds left, I forbear to fill my allotted spot.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you. It is always very interesting to hear you. Now, my dear Emanuelis Ingeris. Emanuelis, you have the floor.
Thank you. After yesterday's huge historical day, it's very pity to have today our final meeting related to our dear Georgia and Georgian friends. And I would like to repeat all the names who now are in prison, and they just were with us a few months ago, just mentioned by dear Lord and by Eric. Mamuka Hasaradze, Badri Japaridze, Zurab Japaridze, Nika Nika Melia, Georgia Vashadze. And tomorrow, Givi Tergamadze is invited to this unlawful, fake commission to investigate what they did 10 years ago. And actually, they have an idea, even prove their activities in our parliamentary assembly. Wow. I'm coming back to Pablo Hispan, my Bulais, and a few other of you present during last elections. And who is responsible? Who produced the paper that the elections were free and fair? Who are those criminals? Criminals are in OCE team, I'm sorry to say, who produced the paper and tried to influence European Parliament our final observations, NATO Parliamentary Assembly remarks. I remember every detail. I was the chair of election observation mission during the first election of Georgia Dream from Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly side. And the same guys who are operating now inside of OSCE, they are producing fake, from my point of view, it's my point of view. I'm very polite guy, but this time it's too much. Elections were not free and not fair. I saw TV cameras with Denise O'Hara and going in every place, Georgian Dream TV cameras in every poll station. Pablo, it was like that? Yes. So, and we are just making fake final resolutions that elections was free and fair, when the Russian influence agents, they're taking over Georgia and bringing Georgia back to Belarusian dictatorship side or to Russian side. All those guys were tens and tens of years inside of the Georgia, presenting pro-European view. Now they are arrested. All those guys were pro-Ukrainian for liberation of Ukraine. They're arrested. So all those parties who now are parties of Georgia, and we are based on party system, are eliminated. And Georgia Dream is only one Belarusian type, Lukashenko type party. So in this case, we should say altogether that we will think how Europe will react. The European Union should react. Lithuania will chair European Union 27. I don't think that we will be positive about Georgia's entry to Europe, and we will close the question if until this time Georgia will not make any sign and liberate immediately those fantastic patriots of Europe, patriots of Georgia, patriots of Ukraine. Immediately release them from jail. Thank you. And last one, I'm sorry, I would like to say that we are congratulating Maria Mezentsova. I'm sorry, it's side of, but we should say with her newborn boy, it's best answer to regime in Moscow that Maria Mezentsova, who was with us years and years, have new boy, his name actually is Theo. Thank you.
Theodore, like mine. Thank you for reminding this. We all send our best wishes to Maria. But listen, my dear Emanuelis, you don't like the expression, the oldest member, you are the more mature, how do you call it? I mean, the one who is here for more than 30 years, and you are experienced, and you are a nobleman. So let me tell you this, next week I'm going to participate in the OSCE meeting in Porto. What should I respond them when they tell me, a colleague of yours called us criminals, and you didn't react? I think that it would be good to withdraw this description of criminals. They may have made mistakes, but criminals is a bit heavy. Would you like to say a few words on that? Thank you.
You like to make me from politicians to become a diplomat. That's the wrong move. So I would like to say that they did everything against our will of our Parliamentary Assembly, NATO and European Parliament, to create an image that elections was free and fair. Elections were not free and not fair, last elections in Georgia. And I would like to say that I have some, let's say, use the politest language. They have some doubts in their observation missions, especially especially after their move to Azerbaijan, if you remember how...
I remember that we are cooperating with OSCE for a long time.
Thank you.
So if this assembly is cooperating with criminals, it's not good for the assembly.
Yes,
but thank you so much.
I apologize for these words, but I continue to say that they did not the best job during the elections.
I didn't ask to withdraw anything of the rest. Thank you so much, Emanuelis. Thanks for understanding. And now the last speaker in our list is Albana Voxi. Albana.
Thank you, dear President, dear colleagues, my dear friend Emanuelis. From my experience, dictators and authoritarians organize perfect elections. Everything happens before people go to the boxes. The most violated elections, those that are not free and fair, are organized by dictators. This is my personal impression. Grave and alarming news continues to reach us from Georgia. Only in the past week, 4 democratic opposition leaders were thrown behind the bars, not for committing crimes, but for declining to appear before the so-called investigatory commission that has nothing to do with the rule of law and everything to do with political persecution. In Georgia today, institutions of accountability have been hijacked into instruments of repression. Let us not forget the 3rd president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, who served as vice president of this assembly, still remains in political imprisonment for the first consecutive year. His case is not isolated. Other prominent opposition figures, Mamuka Kazarada, Nika Nika Melia, Zurab Japaridze, Badri Japaridze, Georgi Vashadze have all faced detentions in recent months. Their only offense, daring to challenge the regime and defend democracy. The chair of the main opposition party, Ms. Tina Bokuchava, one of the most excellent active opposition women leaders, has been targeted with terror. Her husband was violently abducted. Her children were threatened. This is not politics, this is persecution. And we have to call this as it is. And if we continue to look away, it will not be long before every opposition leader in Georgia will be behind the bars, and parties will shrink and cease to exist, and there won't be opposition. Worse still, we now learn that the so-called investigatory commission plans to persecute Georgian MPs for their participants in this assembly, for coming here, for meeting us, for exercising their democratic duties. So when politicians are criminalized for speaking to this chamber, that the heart of European democracy, then what can we call it? It is authoritarianism that shouts. The European Parliament, in its June 2024 resolution, has sounded the alarm. It has demanded immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners, the repeal of repressive FARA laws, the holding of new free and fair parliamentary election, and the call for targeted sanctions. It has also denounced politically motivated persecution of journalists like Mzia Amaglobeli. The authoritarian path of Georgian dream must be confronted, not appeased. The Georgian people have not given up. They have stood up in streets, in squares, online, offline for over 200 days. They protest not only for their rights, but the real European dream. They deserve more than our speeches and statements. They deserve solidarity and action. Let us not allow silence to be our complicity. Let us rise the moment before democracy in Georgia becomes only a memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Albana. And with Albana's speech, we conclude the list of speakers, and I will give now... Is a point of order? Okay.
Point of order, Mr. President. That's a very important debate and a very worrying situation. And unfortunately, this assembly could not show how worried it is, because many of our colleagues who wanted to attend this debate and speak were not able to do so, because you know how the parliamentary agendas are on Thursday evening. So can I please ask you, Mr. President, and the table office, in the future for such a debate, such an important debate like this one, that we don't do it on Thursday evening, but rather on Thursday morning or Wednesday. Thank you.
Dear Damien, I fully agree that the hemicycle should have more of our parliamentarians, of our colleagues, but allow me to say that we all know that we gather 4 times a year. We are here from Monday to Friday, and we should be here from Monday to Friday. I see no ambassadors around. When I say to the ambassadors, and I repeatedly said the last month that only 16 ambassadors out of 46 participated in the annual meeting of the Committee of Ministers, then I have to complain or I have to point out that we should be here. Thank you for what you have said, but of course I will talk with the Presidential Committee this evening, what you have just raised. But I wanted to express my opinion. We have to be here. And tomorrow morning, we have to be here. So, now I'm going to give Stefan Gettins the floor for 3 minutes to respond to the debate. Stefan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I firstly thank all colleagues who have made very powerful contributions. If I may, I'm going to start with the words that you, Mr. President, used. Democracy is hard, but a lack of democracy is harder. That was an important point to start off with, and one which speaks to why we're talking about this today. We've heard about what's going on in Georgia. We're worried about what's going on in Georgia. If I may, I will mention my 2 United Kingdom colleagues, Leslie Griffiths and Perrin Moon, who both made incredibly powerful speeches, but including the point that something must be done, and we must continue to monitor the situation in Georgia. We owe that at least to our colleagues in the country. Mr. Kroes made a very powerful speech. Mr. Kroes, you know that Estonia knows what the price is of a lack of democracy. Estonia knows the price of Russian aggression and invasion. And I have to say, he made a very, very good speech in talking about those Georgian protesters who protest under the European flag that I proudly wear today. And they deserve to have us standing alongside them. Mr. Lukaides, you talked about the violence. Ms. Bauer, about the decline in democracy. Mr. Gonchenko talked about Georgia being the first victim of Russian aggression. All powerful points and all incredibly important reminders for each and every one of us. Georgia is a proud country, it's a wonderful country, as a number of colleagues have reflected upon here, as Mr. Panman reflected on from his experiences in Georgia. And as my colleague says, and he does mean it, I spent some happy times working in Georgia. Kamarju Sakartvelo, long live Georgia, is important, but also long live Europe. It was the poet Mikhail Lermontov who, when he thought of his links between the Scottish Highlands and between his native Caucasus, talked about the connectivity between the two. And I believe in that connectivity between these different European states. So when a proud nation like Georgia is struggling, it deserves our attention, it deserves to be on our radar. And I would call for all of us to continue to keep an eye on this, that we must bring it forward. Mr. Cotier was right to raise his points. It's unfortunate, but I know there are a number of my colleagues with constituency commitments and others. But finally, if I've quoted Lermontov, let me quote Robert Burns. Robert Burns, and I was reminded because I've been using his pen today, who's Scotland's national poet. And he said, "A man's a man for all that." Very basically a translation, we're all the same. And we're all the same, and therefore, when one of us in Europe is struggling, then we all struggle, and that's why this continues to be important. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, dear Stefan. Dear colleagues, I remind you that at the end of a current affairs debate, the Assembly is not asked to decide upon a text, but the matter may be referred by the Bureau to the responsible committee for a report. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the agenda approved by the Assembly. I just want to remind you that we have initiated some months ago the free debate on Friday morning. Everybody can take the floor and speak on the matter that he or she believes is important to be heard in this Assembly. Thank you so much. The sitting is adjourned.